Chapter 401. Chen Changshan decided that he could not wait for Wang Po to be defeated before acting. Standing on the rainy street, the two walls seemed rather solemn and stirring, but in reality, it was meaningless. The reason he had thought this way before was because he had no confidence in himself at the time. He had only wanted to do his best and leave the rest to fate. No matter how astonishing his talent was, he had only cultivated for a little more than a year. Not to mention the broken meridians in his body, it was truly an absurd and laughable thing to want to fight against the storms of the 8 directions in such a short amount of time. He originally thought that even if he were to use his sword later, it would only be to show his sincerity. But now he changed his mind, because with each cultivator that fell, his confidence increased by a fraction. Ethereal opening cultivators were no longer able to threaten him. Just a moment ago, there had even been a cultivator who should have entered the initial level of star condensation not too long ago, but he had actually cut down a cultivator in the rain with a single strike of his sword. If it wasn't for the level of the battle at the other end of the street being too high, too dazzling, perhaps more people would have noticed Chen Changshan's inconceivable feat, the advancement he had obtained in the Mausoleum of Books, the harvest he had gained in the Garden of Zhou, the sword he had learned along the way back to the south with Su Li, and the image of Wang Po in the torrential rain. All of these were perfectly displayed in this one attack. Looking at Wang Po, who was bitterly enduring in the storm, looking at the blood that was constantly flowing from his body, which was quickly being diluted by the torrential rain, Chen Changshan's gradually strengthened confidence and gradually recovering true essence caused an intense desire to well up within his heart. He wanted to try and see if he could stab Zhu Luo with his sword. Even if his opponent was one of the legendary storms of the 8 directions, he still wanted to stab with his sword. To be honest, he didn't know how he should attack or where he should stab. However, he thought that since he had decided to attack, then he would naturally know how to execute it. Chen Changshan walked past those cultivators lying in the rain, leaving Su Li's horse and walking towards Wang Po. As he walked, he began to calm his heart and clear his mind, his eyes growing brighter and brighter. His opponent was Zhu Luo, a nascent saint who could easily suppress his blazing sword. Before the moonlight, how could a firefly possibly shine? The moonlight-like sword intent on the rainy street drifted erratically, impossible to calculate, so the intellectual sword naturally couldn't be used. Then what sword should he use? What kind of sword was his strongest sword? Chen Changshan knew what his strongest sword was. On the Mausoleum of Zhou, he had once thrust his sword at the shadow that obscured half the sky. He didn't know if he could still use that sword, but he wanted to try. His divine sense landed on the Dragoncry sword. At this moment, the Dragoncry sword used its scabbard as its hilt and became one. The moment his divine sense descended, it awakened the souls within the sword. He awakened the 10,000 broken swords and prepared to borrow the sword intent again. The black dragon woke up as well. He took a deep breath. His true essence violently combusted, and his body became incomparably hot. The rainwater that constantly fell upon his clothes instantly turned into steam, covering his upper body. His broken meridians let out an unbearable sound, and an intense pain spread from every part of his body to his sea of consciousness. The raging Jinyuan finally succeeded in breaking through several blockages and moved to his wrist. He was ready to draw his sword. The countless sword wheels in the sword and the wisp of black dragon's soul also silently prepared themselves. However, at this moment, Chen Changshan suddenly felt that the surrounding rainy street had become a little darker. Was it because of the mist in front of him? It was not because of the fog, but because someone had blocked the light from the street. Chen Changshan suddenly felt very cold. His body had long since been drenched by the cold rain. Logically speaking, he should have become numb, but at this moment, he seemed to clearly feel a strand of cold wind brush past his neck. A chill arose from the bottom of his heart. His body stiffened, and he found it impossible to move. Only now did he remember that he had forgotten something. That was the most important thing. To be more precise, he had forgotten a person that could not be forgotten. He carried Su Li across tens of thousands of li of snowy plains, returning from the land of demons to the human world. An assassin had been following them the entire time. This assassin was very famous, so Su Li somewhat looked down on him. Of course, only Su Li had the right to look down on this assassin. It must be known that this assassin was ranked third on the ranking of assassins of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. No one had ever dared to look down on him, and the vast majority of those who did were probably already dead. Chen Changsheng knew that he absolutely did not have the right to look down on this assassin. Moreover, on the entire journey, Su Li would often stare silently at the distant mountains. From those scenes, he knew that even Su Li felt some fear towards this assassin in the depths of his heart. Su Li and he had always been very vigilant, whether it was with Xue He or with Liang Hongzhuang, even when they were forced into desperate straits. Even when it seemed like they could die at any moment, they still did not forget the existence of this assassin and prepared a backup plan. Only just now did Chen Changsheng finally forget about this matter. Just when he was the most confident, felt that he was at his strongest, when his will to fight was at its most resolute. He walked toward Zhu Luo, but he left Su Li. He did not know that the assassin was between him and Su Li, soaked in the rain and lying on the ground. It was the cultivator that he had faked being knocked down, and the assassin was currently standing up. After several dozen days and nights of hiding and waiting, the assassin had finally found the perfect opportunity. The assassin did not wear a mask. He had an ordinary appearance, and his brows and eyes could be seen everywhere. When the rain fell on his face, it did not leave a single mark. It was also very difficult for his appearance to leave a mark on a person's heart. This was a very ordinary and unremarkable person, just like a rock on the side of the road, a tile in a ruin. Chen Changsheng felt the activity behind him, and his body became incomparably stiff. He wanted to turn around, but he knew it was too late. It truly was too late. That assassin would not give him any more chances, would not give Su Li any chances. The assassin floated in the rain in front of the horse. His movement technique seemed very ordinary, but it was very fast. Then he struck. His sword was very ordinary, and his sword technique also seemed very ordinary, but it was very fast. In short, everything happened very quickly. But this assassin's cultivation was very abnormal. The tip of that ordinary sword noiselessly glittered with countless fragments of stars. An extremely powerful and also extremely secluded chi accompanied the sword. The upper level of star condensation. An upper-level star condensation assassin? This had already surpassed the scope of many people's understanding. He had already cultivated to the upper level of star condensation. So why did he still need to kill people for a living? Why did this assassin want to kill Su Li? Just how frightening was this assassin? The rain continued to fall. Chen Changsheng gripped his sword with both hands and stood on the rainy street. Behind him, the assassin was like a ghost, striking at Su Li with his sword. Everything had happened too quickly. It seemed like it was already too late to change anything. The sound of the rain was furious. Suddenly, a rather soft sound rang out. It was the sound of a sword meeting blood. Recently, my health has not been good, and I have been especially busy. I have very few updates. Please forgive me, everyone. I will strive to write more after the 22nd, but I have been writing very diligently. I hope everyone will like it. Chapter 402. The assassin was behind Chen Changsheng. He had used the simplest and even somewhat stupid method to make all of Chen Changsheng's vigilance and defenses fall to nothing. Now, he had already rushed in front of Su Li, only a distance of 1 zhang. To an upper-level star condensation assassin, this distance did not exist. Besides experts of the divine domain, only a few people like Jin Yulu and Nank could rely on their innate speed to be faster than him. The assassins and Su Li's gazes met in the torrential rain. It was already an unchangeable situation of certain death, so their gazes were very calm. However, this calmness concealed an extremely complex emotion. The assassin looked at Su Li. In the depths of his emotionless eyes, one could faintly see a trace of pain that was difficult to erase and a hatred that had been accumulated for countless years. As for Su Li, He looked at the assassin that had broken through the rain. The emotions between his brows were very undisciplined, as if he did not care about this person's life at all. Yet why did he seem so solemn? The yellow paper umbrella was in Su Li's left hand, soaked in the rain. His right hand was still some distance from the handle of the umbrella. Did he still have the strength to fight? In the next moment, would he do what he did in the snowy plains, or in the inn, and grab the handle of the umbrella? After following them silently for several dozen days and nights, no matter how desperate Chen Changsheng and Su Li had been when facing Shui, he and Liang Hongzhuang, the assassin, had never acted. Even when Liang Wang's son and Xiao Zhang had arrived in the inn, he still did not take the opportunity to act. It had to be said that this assassin, ranked third in the world, truly possessed an unimaginable cautiousness and acuity. At that time, he believed that the situation could still change, so he had never moved. Only now, when Wang Pahad appeared, Zhu Luo had struck, and Qin Changsheng had walked hot-bloodedly to the other end of the street. When all the changes had come to an end, did he choose to strike? When all the changes had come to an end, his appearance was the only change. At the end of the road, when the water flows, the stone will be revealed. When the sun sets, there is naturally no turning back. It was just like how Chen Changsheng had left Su Li. Even if it was only 10 odd steps, it was already too late to turn back, much less turn around to save him. Chen Changsheng's body was very cold. He was not Jin Yulu, nor was he Nank. Although he knew the Yeshur step, it was still impossible for him to return to Su Li's side in such a short amount of time. The fastest thing in the world was not the red eagle, not the red goose, not Jin Yulu, not Nank, not that assassin, but thought. As he thought these things with despair, his body began to move. He didn't even realize he had moved. What he used was the Yeshur step. He did not turn around, nor did he calculate the position of stars. He completely relied on his knowledge of the several thousand positions of the Yeshur step to recall Su Li's position, and then he disappeared into the rainy sky. He knew that it would be difficult for him to get back before the assassin, but he wanted to try. Perhaps it was because the entire world felt that Su Li should not have died at this time. Or perhaps it was because the entire world was moved by his intense remorse and desire to make up for it. Or perhaps it was because his increase in cultivation made the Yeshur step even faster. Or perhaps it was because the assassin's movement technique and sword were not as fast as people imagined. Or perhaps it was because he had attached a strand of sword intent to the Yeshur step. A soft sound rang out. In the rainy street, that was the sound of the sword coming into contact with blood. That was the sound of the water's sack bursting. Chen Changsheng appeared in the rainy sky in front of Su Li. He had actually used the Yeshur step to get ahead of that assassin. He lowered his head to look at his abdomen. The assassin's sword had pierced into his abdomen, and blood slowly flowed out. The assassin looked at Chen Changsheng, a slightly perplexed expression appearing in his originally indifferent eyes. He could not understand how his sword had pierced into Chen Changsheng's body. Chen Changsheng also had many things that he could not understand. For example, an upper-level star condensation assassin was actually so formidable, actually able to easily pierce through his body. Although the stab was not too deep, it really was still painful. He looked at his abdomen that was slowly leaking blood, somewhat perplexed, and also somewhat gratified. Why was it that the blood that flowed now had no taste? The assassin could not understand how Chen Changsheng could return so quickly. There was a remnant sword intent that lingered in the rain. The assassin sensed it, and then he knew that it was the final move of the Mount Li sword style. The final move of the Mount Li sword style, mutual destruction, risking one's life and forgetting one's own. It was a sword that did not care about one's life. To not even care about one's life, it was naturally very ruthless. Because it was very ruthless, it was very fast. From the battle and the grand examination to the snowy plains, and then to cultivating the blazing sword, Chen Changsheng was very familiar with this sword. In the world, there is no one more familiar with this sword than him. In his moment of despair, he had no time to strike, only enough time to strike. This strike did not need the sword, only its heroism. Fortunately, or perhaps unluckily, he won his gamble. He used the final move of the Mount Li sword style to return to Su Li. He used his own body to block this assassin's incomparably sinister and powerful strike. Blood slowly flowed out and was then washed away by the rain. The rainy street was quiet. Seeing this sight, the crowd was shocked speechless. No one had expected that Chen Changsheng would actually risk his life to protect Su Li, and no one had expected that he would be heavily injured because of this. Everyone in Xuanyang City had come to kill Su Li, but no one wanted to kill Chen Changsheng. He was the principal of the Orthodox Academy. He was the Pope's nephew. This was just an accident. An accident, right? It truly was an accident. Whether it was Zhu Luo on the other side of the street, Su Li on his horse, or even the assassin in front of him, they were all very surprised. Then what to do next? Soon after, there was another light sound in the rainy street. Blood spurted out, and the sword left Chen Changsheng's body. The assassin once more attacked Su Li. He was very calm, even somewhat wooden. Chen Changsheng stepped onto the star position, broke through the curtain of rain, and used his sword to get up. He once more appeared in front of the assassin's sword. With a squelch, the edge of the sword once more sank into his abdomen, bringing with it fresh blood. His face was pale, but there were 2 smears of red. This was the color brought about by pain and blood loss, and also the heroism of stubbornness and willpower mixed together. The assassin slightly lowered his head and calmly looked at him. He said nothing, but the meaning in his eyes was very clear. You will die. Chen Changsheng was heavily injured and unable to speak. As the rain flowed past his face, the meaning was also very clear. So what? Some people chose to die in order to save others, like Chen Changsheng. Some people chose to die in order to kill others, like Liang Xiaoxiao. From the snowy plains of the land of demons to Tianliang County, tens of thousands of li to the south, Chen Changsheng and Su Li encountered many things and were concerned about certain places. The place that Chen Changsheng was most concerned about was the capital, while the place that Su Li was most concerned about was Mount Li. Mount Li was also very concerned about Su Li, but at that time, Mount Li was facing many troublesome problems. Qiu Shanjun was still unconscious from his heavy injuries, and Qi Jian, who had just been transported back to Mount Li, was also unconscious. Afterwards, many people came from Mount Li. Many people in the capital were worried about Chen Changsheng. Luo Luo stood on the roof of the Hall of Pure Virtue, gazing at the setting sun every day. Her elegant and small face was filled with worry and sorrow. The Orthodox Academy was as quiet as a grave. Every day, Xin Yuan Po would go to the Mausoleum of Books to see if Tang 36 had come out. The great banyan tree by the lake was a pressing green in the spring, yet no one came to investigate. The matter in the Garden of Zhou had already come to an end, but the aftermath was far from settling. People left Hanqiu City and spread the matter in the Garden of Zhou, as well as the shocking news outside the Garden of Zhou to the entire continent. The demons had used some unknown method to sneak into the Garden of Zhou and then forcefully closed it, stirring up countless rains of blood and foul winds. Afterwards, the Garden of Zhou suddenly collapsed for some reason and should have been destroyed by now. Many talented young cultivators had fallen within, but the most shocking thing was that Chen Changsheng had disappeared from the Garden of Zhou, his fate unknown. The current Chen Changsheng was no longer that young Taoist from Xining Village's old temple. He was first place of the first banner in last year's grand examination. In the Mausoleum of Books, he had attracted a sky full of starlight and helped several dozen cultivators of the same age break through. He was also the young genius that the Pope valued the most, the youngest principal of the Orthodox Academy in history. The fate of such a person was unknown and his whereabouts unknown. Of course, it would attract the shocked gazes of the entire continent. The only thing that could compare to this matter was the accusation that Liang Xiaoxiao had made before his death. Before his death, Liang Xiaoxiao did not explain, but everyone present knew that what he wanted to say was, Chen Changsheng, Qi Jian, and Zhixio were colluding with the demons. If it were anyone else making this accusation, they would only invite ridicule. But Liang Xiaoxiao was a disciple of Mount Li, one of the illustrious divine state's 7 laws. He had no reason to frame his junior brother, Qi Jian. Most importantly, Liang Xiaoxiao was dead. He had died under the final move of the Mount Li sword style. And the dead could not lie. The dead can't even speak, so they naturally can't lie. The problem is when that Mount Li disciple said those words, he was still not dead. So what makes you think that he wouldn't lie? But Liang Xiaoxiao was already heavily injured at the time and not far from death. Those words were equivalent to his last words. Zhou Tong was expressionless. His two eyebrows, under the illumination of the oil lamp, were like two lines of ink. He said, "Just because his last words are reliable, then it will be much easier for my department for purging officials to handle cases in the future. If there's any lord that feels that I don't have enough evidence, I can arrange for one of their nephews to commit suicide and leave behind a few words before he dies." I never knew that Lord Zhou Tong cared so much about evidence, Mo said to him. She had never liked Zhou Tong, and the entire capital knew of this matter. Of course, this did not affect her and Zhou Tong's cooperation in the court. As the Divine Empress's two most reliable arms in the imperial court, they had to cooperate well. The important point is that no one believes that Chun Changsheng is colluding with the demons, so I need evidence. Zhou Tong's expression did not change as he calmly said, "In reality, if that Mount Li disciple had not died, do you think that the Li Palace would have agreed to hand Zhou over to me just based on Zhuang Huanyu's accusation?" After a moment of silence, Mo asked, "What was the result of the interrogation?" He did not say a single word, so there is naturally no result. Zhou Tong expressionlessly said, "I will interrogate him for a month. At that time, if he still does not admit that he and Chun Changsheng are colluding with the demons, then I will admit that what he said was the truth." Hearing this, Mo felt a chill and her face paled. Zhou had already been imprisoned for many days. If he were to be imprisoned for another month, would he still be able to come out alive? It must be known that the prison he was in was not the imperial court prison, nor was it the prison of the Ministry of Justice. It was the most sinister and terrifying Zhou prison of legends. No one could last so long in Zhou prison. Even if they could, it was still too cruel. Cruel to the point that even Zhou Tong felt some sympathy for that wolf youth. It's written quite well. I hope that there will be an update tomorrow. If not, I will let everyone know in advance. Chapter 403. Mo asked, "Why do you need Wofu Zhishio to speak?" Zhou Tong replied, "Because no one believes that Qin Changsheng is colluding with the demons. The death of that Mount Li disciple can only make people doubt this, but it is not enough to shake their faith unless Zhishio admits that they did something." As the youngest principal of the Orthodox Academy in history, many people believed that Chun Changsheng was highly likely to become the next master of the Li Palace. The next pope, there was no brighter future in this world. The demons simply could not offer better conditions, so he naturally had no reason to betray humanity and collude with the demons to do those things. Mo was quiet for a while, then asked, "Do you believe it?" No matter how the entire continent evaluated Zhou Tong, no matter how cruel and terrifying Zhou Tong's methods were, everyone admitted that when it came to investigating cases, Zhou Tong was unparalleled. Whether I believe it or not has never been the most important thing. Evidence is the most important thing. Zhou Tong continued, "So I gave that wolf youth another month of time. In truth, that month of time was also given to me." Mo looked into his calm and tranquil eyes and asked, "Even if the military has a lot of objections to this?" The corner of Zhou Tong's mouth twitched as he smiled. "You think I care about these things?" Mo mocked. "I've always wondered, besides the Empress, just what else do you care about?" Zhou Tong did not respond to these rather disrespectful words. Instead, he said, "In truth, I still care about a few very interesting people and matters, like that dead Mount Li disciple. If I weren't sure that he was really dead, I would very much like to have him be my successor." Mo's expression changed. "Why? I've rarely seen someone so ruthless to themselves. If they could be so ruthless to themselves, then presumably they have no love for this world. And this is the prerequisite for becoming my successor." Zhou Tong obviously did not have any love for this world. and he did not even have the slightest bit of kindness. Moreover, Liang Xiaoxiao's judgment of the general situation and his calculations of the situation were extremely accurate. He clearly understood that even his own death was not enough to drag Qin Changsheng and Zhixiu into the abyss. So in that performance outside the Garden of Zhou before his death, he very clearly divided Mount Li and the capital into two lines. Framing Qin Changsheng and Zhixiu was just something he did in passing. His true target was Mount Li, it was Su Li, and of course there was also that girl called Qi Jian. Upon hearing these words, Imoyu suddenly felt her body grow somewhat cold. It turned out that Zhou Tong knew everything, understood everything very clearly. He knew that Qi Jian was Su Li's daughter, knew of the hatred in Liang Xiaoxiao's heart, knew that all of this was a scheme. So you knew everything. She stared into Zhou Tong's eyes. Zhou Tong ignored him and continued. Many people need Qin Changsheng to collude with the demons, but Liang Xiaoxiao used the final move of the Mount Li sword style to kill himself. This is truly extraordinary. Imoyu said, then what do you think? Didn't you say that the most important thing is evidence? Zhou Tong fell silent for a while, then suddenly said, Qin Changsheng's teacher is Daoist Ji, and no one knows what relationship Daoist Ji has with Blackrobe. So why can't Qin Changsheng collude with the demons? Moreover, Qin Changsheng is still alive. Since the Guard of Zhou has already been destroyed, and so many people at the main gate have not seen him, how did he leave the Garden of Zhou? Other doors? Don't forget, only Blackrobe knows where the other doors of the Garden of Zhou are. Imoyu fell silent for a very long time, then said, so it turns out that you really do suspect him. Zhou Tong stood up and walked to the door of the main hall. Gazing at the many stars in the night sky, he said, the accusation that Liang Xiaoxiao used his death to send out is very powerful. It just so happens that there are many people in the capital who need Qin Changsheng to collude with the demons. It just so happens that Qin Changsheng was able to leave the Garden of Zhou, which means that he might be colluding with the demons. Then I naturally want to know whether or not he is colluding with the demons. Imoyu walked up behind him and said with a hint of warning, His Holiness will trust him. Zhou Tong's expression suddenly became rather strange. He said, if His Holiness still insists on trusting him in this sort of situation, then doesn't that mean that His Holiness is no longer worthy of trust? Imoyu suddenly felt that the sinister qi that had seeped out from the courtyard in front of her had arrived here. The air around her had become abnormally cold. She did not know what else to say in this sort of situation. You should first clearly understand just what the Empress is thinking. Then, what are your thoughts? Zhou Tong held his hands behind his back and gazed at the night sky. His voice was as light as the air after a rain, and his thin body seemed rather bleak in the darkness. He really did seem like a sorrowful poet. Me? Thoughts about what? Thoughts about Qin Changsheng. Do you want to die? Imoyu angrily yelled. Zhou Tong's expression did not change in the slightest. He indifferently said, that day, when the news that Qin Changsheng was still alive was sent to the capital, I heard that the flowers in the orange garden bloomed overnight. It seems that your mood is quite good. The anger in Moyu's eyes transformed into killing intent. Zhou Tong did not turn around, as if he did not notice her gaze. Moyu left, and Zhou Tong began to stroll. The entire capital, and even the entire continent, knew that Zhou Tong did not have any hobbies other than walking and personally executing punishments. He treated others strictly, and he was even more strict with himself. He never indulged in sensual pleasures, and he certainly did not indulge in debauchery, even when he was still a young man. He lived an extremely disciplined and strict life, and it could also be described as dry and monotonous. Of course, he also wrote poems of grief and worry for the country. He also wrote memorials to the throne, and he wrote mature strategies for the country. He lived like a great scholar, and in front of the divine empress, he was definitely not a slanderous minister, but a frank minister. Moreover, he was the most honest official in the history of the great Zhou dynasty, because he never lacked money, and also because no one dared to bribe him. In the Garden of Zhou, he raised 15 black Cerberuses. These powerful monsters could only be found in the depths of the demon domain. They possessed a deformed and terrifying appearance, as well as an extremely powerful scouting and battle ability. The black saliva that flowed from them could even corrode the hardest metal. It was probably for this reason that Lord Zhou Tong was not corrupted by money. Bribers could not approach his residence, and those that attempted to sneak into the garden of Zhou to bribe him would become food for these black Cerberuses. In the grass and forest surrounding his residence, who knew how many human bones there were? Deep in the night, 10 odd Cerberuses stood in the darkness. Their black and glossy skin was illuminated by the starlight, giving off a strange feeling. Under the claws and teeth of these black demon dogs was a dungeon. Zhishio was imprisoned in this dungeon. 55 extremely thin metal chains passed through his body. His naked skin was covered in blood, dried or fresh blood, and in many places one could even see the eerie white bones. After some time, he woke up. He felt the chi coming from outside the ventilation hole, and with some difficulty, he raised his head and looked in that direction, breathing rapidly several times. From there, he could see a little bit of the night sky with a few stars. He opened his eyes and looked there, seeming somewhat greedy. But in reality, he could not see anything at all. In the depths of his eyes, there was a lemon color. This was the color of the peacock plumes, poison mixed with blood. It was somewhat sour. After a busy day, I actually didn't stop updating. I really am amazing. Chapter 404. Liang Xiao was dead, so the accusation he had made before his death was naturally extremely powerful. It was just that the other witness to the incident in the Garden of Zhou, Zhuang Huanyu, besides giving an extremely brief explanation of the situation, had maintained his silence for the vast majority of the time. As a result, there were many details in the deceased story that had not been filled in. Coupled with the fact that the person Liang Xiao was testifying against was not an ordinary person, the incident in the Garden of Zhou was very naturally dragged into a quagmire. Even after several dozen days, there was still no progress. Chen Changxing's identity was extremely special. The important figures of the Li Palace were assuredly keeping an eye on this matter. In the grand examination, people had already discovered that Zhashio had a rather good relationship with the Orthodox Academy. Moreover, this wolf youth had achieved countless military merits in the snowy plains of the north, deeply receiving the appreciation of a few divine generals of the Great Zhou army. As for how this matter would develop, many people believed that it would ultimately depend on the divine empress's decision. As a result, the Garden of Zhou became the focus of unparalleled gazes. This was because this was Zhou Tong's mansion. The divine empresses had always been manifested through this craziest and cruelest mad dog. It was also because after the imperial court had taken Zhishio away from the Li Palace, he had been imprisoned here. Very few people knew that the legendary Zhou prison, that great prison that caused countless ministers and generals to tremble in fear at the mention of its name, had originally been in the same building as Zhou Tong's mansion. The two were separated by only tinsum zhang and 2 flimsy doors. The phrase, beautiful scenery on a beautiful day, but the heavens referred to Zhou Tong's mansion and Zhou Tong's prison. The former had the beautiful scenery of the 4 seasons, while the latter was the heavens that could not be helped and the blue sky could not be seen. The black rhinoceros dragged the heavy carriage through the stone arch of the Garden of Zhou, arriving at the sinister building in front of it. Although it was so close, Zhou Tong still habitually rode in the carriage. Other than in front of the divine empress, only in this carriage did he feel safe. The black rhinoceros carriage arrived in front of the prison's tunnel. With a creak, the carriage door slowly opened. Zhou Tong slowly walked out of the carriage. He subconsciously gazed at the night sky, his face somewhat pale under the starlight. The moment he stepped off the carriage, the security around Zhou prison was instantly raised by several levels. As for the shadows of the nearby eaves, who knew how many cultivators were hiding? Zhou Tong was not a weakling. He was a star condensation expert, one of the few experts of the Great Zhou dynasty. But even so, he still lived very cautiously and cautiously. Besides the need to investigate a case, he rarely left Zhou prison. Even if he did leave, the vast majority of the time, he would go to the imperial palace. Moreover, every time he went out, he would bring countless guards with him. He knew very well that there were countless people who wanted to kill him. If there was a ranking of the people on the continent that most people wanted to kill, Su Li would definitely be ranked behind him. He arrived at the dark and cold prison cell. Zhou Tong's expression did not change in the slightest as he looked at the badly mutilated wolf tribe youth. He did not show any of the abnormal excitement that was rumored to have. There was only calmness. Ever since the Divine Empress had ordered him to take over the department for purging officials, Zhou Tong had interrogated countless prisoners, personally used countless punishments, and seen countless wretched situations. There were many people even more wretched than Zhixiu, so it was impossible for him to be moved by this. But he did not believe this to be numbness, nor would he allow himself to become numb because of this bloody scene. He firmly believed that only by maintaining his original intentions toward his work could he continue to maintain his interest and liveliness, and only then could he maintain his keen senses towards many things. Yes, Zhou Tong had always believed that this was just a job. He had originally studied the books of the sages, but he had not done well in policy theory, so he switched to cultivation. He had done quite well in cultivation, but because he was too old, he did not have the opportunity to enter the inner sect of those sects to study. As a result, he began to build his network, finally meeting the Divine Empress in the 100 Herb Garden and taking up this job. When doing a job, one had to love it, and one had to earnestly do it to the best of one's ability. Whether it was reading the books of the sages, cultivating the Tao, or now torturing the people of the world, Zhou Tong had always demanded this of himself, and the facts prove that he had truly succeeded. At 6:15, you fainted from the pain. Based on the time, you should have woken up from the pain, so I will ask you again. If those two women were the two wings of Demon Princess Nank, why did they not work together with that demon general couple and directly kill you? Instead, they worked separately, giving you the chance to separately defeat them? Zhou Tong did not stand in front of Zhixiu and stare into his eyes to pressure him, nor did he look at the file on the table. He stood at the only vent in the dungeon, calmly gazing at the stars in the night sky, seeming rather absent-minded. The file on the table was the statement that Zhixiu had made to Mei Lisha on the road, and after Zhixiu had come to Zhou prison, he had not said a single word. Zhou Tong was keenly aware that mental pressure was of no use to this wolf youth. Zhou Tong had read through the file once and remembered all its contents, including those inconspicuous details. He felt that it was just like Liang Xiaoxiao's last words. Zhixiu's statement also had many questionable points, but he still asked absent-mindedly, because he knew that he did not need to put too much effort into it. Zhixiu would still not admit anything. His question was only a part of his job, a procedure, or perhaps a process. The laws of Zhou stipulated that he had to do something. It was all work. Only by ending this part could he proceed to the next part. Hearing Zhou Tong's voice, Zhixiu finally responded, but he still said nothing. On the contrary, he closed his eyes. After returning from Hanxiu City to the capital, the Li Palace had sent a cardinal to personally treat him. Currently, the poison in his body was completely suppressed in his eyes. Although he still could not see, it should not worsen and his life was not in danger. He did not care about these problems. He was more concerned about what had happened in the Garden of Zhou. Why had the sky of the Garden of Zhou collapsed? Had Nank and those demon experts died? Had Qin Changsheng also died? And also, had Qi Jian's injuries gotten any better? Was he unconscious, or had he already woken up? He concentrated on these matters, hoping that he could use this method to alleviate his pain. However, his face grew paler and paler, beads of sweat the size of soybeans rolling down his forehead. An extremely thin needle was stuck between his eyebrows. Zhou Tong pinched the end of the needle between his fingers and lightly twisted it. Zhou Tong's expression was very calm. It did not seem like he was executing a torture, but more like a doctor saving his patient. Zhixiu's breathing grew more and more hurried. His eyebrows creased more and more, and his body began to violently tremble. The thin chains that passed through his body rubbed against his flesh, scraping away the rotten flesh and new tender flesh. Zhou Tong lightly brushed the end of the needle. Zhishio's mouth was already full of blood from his bite, but he could no longer endure. He cried out in pain, his hoarse voice echoing through the quiet and gloomy Zhou prison. He wanted to faint, but he was in so much pain that he could not faint. Life and death, pain and relief, everything was in Zhou Tong's fingers. Mou left the garden of Zhou and headed for the imperial palace. The wheels of the carriage rolled over the gray stones, causing them to undulate. She felt that it would have been better if the carriage had been pulled by a black goat. However, the black goat did not like Zhou Tong and would never follow her there. Suddenly, the carriage stopped. She calmly gazed at the curtain in front of the carriage and asked, "Your Highness, what do you want to do?" Luolua's voice was clear and bright, like a newly sprouted leaf in early spring. "I want to tell all of you that just because teacher has not returned does not mean that the Orthodox Academy has no one." Chapter 405. Mou parted the curtain in front of her and walked out. Looking at that elegant, cute, and noble little girl, she smiled and said, "Your Highness, I don't really understand what you mean." Luoluo did not smile. Her eyes were still very bright as she said, "You know what I mean? I want Zhishio to return to the Orthodox Academy." Mou slightly raised her brows and pretended to be perplexed as she asked, "Wofu Zhishio, what relationship does he have with the Orthodox Academy?" Luoluo very seriously replied, "Zhishio is a student of the Orthodox Academy." Mou calmly replied, "There is no record in the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, so no one will admit it." This was a very direct refusal. If the Orthodox Academy had no way of proving that Zhishio was a student, then no matter how noble Luo's status was, there was no reason for her to exert pressure on the great Zhou imperial court. Luoluo stared into her eyes and said, "You clearly understand that my teacher and I will definitely protect him." Mou replied, "The imperial court places great importance on the law. Whether Zhishio is guilty or not will still have to be tried." Luoluo asked, "Then have you ever thought, if teacher comes back, how will you explain it to him?" Hearing this, Mou recalled Zhou Tong's words from before. For some reason, she felt angry and said, "Why should I explain it to Chen Changsheng? Do you think I'm afraid of him?" Luoluo asked, "Then why don't you hurry and bring my teacher back?" Mou sneered. "The reason Chen Changsheng hasn't come back is because he wants to follow Su Li. At present, the entire world wants to kill Su Li, but this idiot insists on protecting Su Li. What does this have to do with me? What does it have to do with the Empress? If your Highness has the ability, there is no harm in letting him clearly understand his own stupidity." These words were spoken very quickly, like pearls falling onto a jade plate. The clear sound never stopped, because she truly was very angry. Angry at his stubbornness, angry at his idiocy, angry at his not cherishing his own life. The him here was naturally Chen Changsheng. Luolua's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Looking at her, she said, "If teacher doesn't come back, he naturally has his reasons. If you're really worried about him, if you have the ability, bring him back." Mou became even angrier. She thought to herself, "Why would I be worried about Chen Changsheng's life or death?" She said, "Your Highness, you should be well aware of just who is standing behind the people who killed Su Li in Xuanyang City. If you have the ability, then have His Holiness retract the decree." Luoluo no longer paid her any attention and turned to walk out of the imperial palace. Only her clear and childish voice still echoed. "In any case, if you have the ability, have His Holiness take back my teacher's bed." Hearing these words, Mou's cheeks blushed slightly. She stared at her back, suppressing her shyness as she said, "Your Highness is so young, yet you care about these things. I don't have that kind of ability." It could be said that she had no ability, but when Mou walked onto the dew platform and saw the divine Empress bathe in the radiance of the night pearls at the edge of the platform, she still couldn't help but want to say something. Finally, when she opened her mouth, she talked about her previous encounter. "Chen of you, Mo, of Li Mo, Mou, instead of said of you, when Mou of Mo, of Chen of family, Chen, you and Emperor, Mou softly replied, "Presumably, Chen Changsheng still has some use." The divine empress smiled. In the past few days, the capital has been spreading the news that Qin Changsheng was not able to leave the Garden of Zhou and may have already lost his life. I hear that she's very sad. Mo thought, sad is not as simple as that. Just when she was about to say something, the divine empress suddenly turned around and glanced at her. It was just a very simple glance, very light, without any deep meaning, just a casual glance. It didn't ask about the relationship between her and Qin Changsheng like Zhou Tong and Luo Luo did, but her body suddenly became much colder. After hearing the news that Qin Changsheng had died in the Garden of Zhou, her mood was also somewhat off. Of course, she did not cry. She only felt somewhat disappointed, very perplexed, as if something was missing from her life. She knew that this sort of emotional reaction was very problematic. She was very worried that others would see this problem. But tonight, first Zhou Tong had asked, then Luo Luo had brought it up, and now the Empress had glanced at her. How could she not be nervous? Fortunately, the divine Empress did not do anything. She only extended her hand and lightly stroked her smooth and exquisite cheek, like she was playing with a cat, or like she was playing with some very wonderful object. Everyone knew that Mo Yu was an extremely beautiful woman, so beautiful that she was like a work of art. The divine Empress rarely acted so intimately with anyone, not even her own daughter, let alone those sons who had died and descendants who had been exiled to the various counties. In these past few years, only Mo Yu was an exception. There were times when some busybodies would even make many scandalous speculations about the relationship between these two lofty women of the Great Zhou dynasty, but these speculations did not spread too far. This was because the divine empress's status was too lofty, and also because the divine empress was also a beauty. She was even more beautiful than Mo Yu. From the era of Taizong, she had been publicly acknowledged as the #1 beauty. Qin Changsheng will not die. The divine empress gazed at the myriad stars in the night sky, her expression very casual. Mo Yu heard these words, but it was like she had heard the voice of an immortal. She immediately felt much more relaxed. She walked to the divine empress's side, and just like in the past when the mood was at its best, she lightly held the divine empress's arm. Then what about Su Li? Will he die? Today, at noon, the news that Su Li and Qin Changsheng had appeared in Xuanyang City had finally reached the capital, and Zhu Luo's action had only been confirmed at dusk. Su Li was an enemy feared by the demons, and, at the same time, he had always been an opponent of the Great Zhou. Mo Yu would not care about his life or death like she did for Qin Changsheng. She would only be a little worried, because Su Li was no ordinary person. His life or death was highly likely to change the entire situation of the continent. And just what did the divine empress think about this? What I think is not important because no one has ever asked me what I think about this matter. The divine empress stood on the edge of the dew platform, her hands held behind her. Her figure was clearly graceful, but it gave off a majestic feeling like she was embracing the world. Her words at this moment were tinged with ridicule and coldness. Mo Yu understood the Empress's meaning. Divine General Shui, he had not received the Empress's decree before making his move, but the entire continent would regard his action as the Divine Empress's will. In the Great Zhou dynasty, whether it was the old or the new powers, the imperial court or the orthodoxy, there were far too many people who wanted Su Li dead. This was because the millions upon millions of Zhou people had a common dream, to unite the North and South and unite the world. But if he dies, then he dies. The divine empress gazed at that star in the night sky that had already shone brightly for several centuries, but had now become abnormally dim. After a moment of silence, she said, "In any case, I don't like Su Li. He's too distant from the world. What use is there in keeping him?" The next chapter will be updated before 12. Chapter 406. In Xuanyang City, there were only two factions that had the qualifications or the confidence to directly oppose Zhu Luo, Shui He and the Great Zhou Northern Army, and Hua Jiefu and the branch of the Orthodoxy. From Zhu Luo's actions, the Li Palace's stance was extremely clear. Now that the Divine Empress had agreed to Su Li's death, Su Li truly did deserve to die, but Zhixiu was still imprisoned in Zhou prison. Mou found it somewhat impossible to ascertain just what the Empress thought of Chen Changsheng. In the end, she could not hold back and voiced the doubt in her heart. If Chen Changsheng insists on protecting Su Li, then what should we do? The Divine Empress calmly replied, "Don't forget what kind of person Zhu Luo is." Of the 4 families of Tianliang, the Liang household had endured silently for 1,000 years. In that great chaos 10-some years ago, Su Li's sword had stolen away all of its boldness. Although Liang Wang's son was very outstanding, it was no longer possible for him to recreate the Liang household's former magnificence. The Wang clan was half in ruins, and its old garden had long since been reduced to ruins. Even a person like Wang had been forced to flee to the south. Only Zhu Luo had a good relationship with the old imperial clan, and his relationship with Mei Lisha was even more intimate. For him to attack Su Li in Xuanyang City, it was obvious that it was the Li Palace's will, so he naturally would not let Chen Changsheng die. As for whether or not there would be an accident, the storms of the 8 directions were transcendental experts. After Su Li was heavily injured, Zhu Luo was the sole, supreme existence in Xuanyang City. He had complete control over the situation, so how could he let an accident happen? Mou understood everything and finally relaxed. Looking at the Empress's dazzling and beautiful face, she thought to herself, "Then what about you? Do you want Chen Changsheng to live, or do you want him to die?" Some people died to kill like Liang Xiaoxiao. Some people went to die to save, like Chen Changsheng and Wang Pe. There were also some people that were striving to revive themselves so that they could live. That person was Qiu Shanjun. When the clue to the Garden of Zhou appeared on the continent, as the world's publicly acknowledged #1 ethereal opening cultivator, Qiu Shanjun accepted the arrangements of the 5 saints and entered someplace. Under the confrontation of several demon experts of the same level, he seized the key to the Garden of Zhou. For the sake of this matter, he had disappeared for many days, missing the grand examination and viewing the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books. He also did not know that the Mount Li Sword sect and the Qiushan clan had decided to go to the capital to propose for him. Moreover, he had been heavily injured, and it had been difficult for him to recover. But all of this was worth it because the Garden of Zhou had fallen into the hands of humans, because when he was in desperate straits, he erupted with unprecedented energy, and because the blood of the true dragon had awakened once more, allowing him to successfully break into star condensation in one go. Just like before, he had once again shocked the entire world. Who could compare to Qiu Shanjun? Chen Changsheng had obtained first place upon the first banner in the grand examination and had attracted a Knight of Starlight in the Mausoleum of Books. Together with Su Yurong, he had become the youngest upper-level ethereal opening cultivator in history, but he still could not catch up to him. Some clergy of Li Palace and people like Tang 36 had a different view on this. From their point of view, Chen Changsheng was still young and had only cultivated for a little more than a year. To have such progress, it was only a matter of time before he caught up to Qiu Shanjun. They even thought that comparing Qiu Shanjun to Chen Changsheng was like bullying the weak. But in reality, Qiu Shanjun was actually not even 20 years old. He was even younger than Go Hanshi by a year. It was just that his blood of the true dragon and his talent in cultivation were far too shocking. His style of conduct was far too perfect. He had become famous too early. So many people, whether they were Chen Changsheng supporters or his admirers, had all forgotten about this matter. To possess a star domain before the age of 20, just what sort of concept was this? This was a legend. As long as he could calmly and courageously live and cultivate like he had in the past 20 years, it was extremely likely that he would become the second Su Li. No, in the view of countless people, he was even more steady and trustworthy than Su Li. The human world needed someone like him even more. But first, Qiu Shanjun had to come back to life. Black Robe had shaken the rainbow that had traversed tens of thousands of li, causing the injuries in his body to become even more severe. Afterwards, in order to stabilize the rainbow, In order to quickly reopen the Garden of Zhou and bring out the human cultivators within, Qiu Shanjun disregarded his heavy injuries and endlessly poured true essence and the qi of his blood into the rainbow day and night. When the gate to the Garden of Zhou finally reopened, his mind slightly relaxed. He could no longer endure, so he closed his eyes on the prayer mat and fell into a deep sleep. He was not truly unconscious, but in the entirety of Mount Li, only he knew the secret technique of the path of the sword rest. When Martial Granduncle Su Li had passed on sword styles to him for a month, the first thing he had taught him was sword rest. On the surface, sword rest seemed like a coma, but the difference was that the person who entered the state of sword rest could still hear the sounds of the outside world. It was just that because all the true essence and essence blood had to be used to suppress and repair the injuries and cleanse the Tao heart, there was no more. Not even a single drop of essence blood could be used to maintain movement. Even moving a finger would directly cause the injuries to completely explode. In other words, the current Qiu Shanjun was like a blind youth paralyzed in bed. The reason why Qiu Shanjun had so resolutely poured all his essence blood into the rainbow was because he was worried about his fellow cultivators in the Garden of Zhou, worried about his junior sister Su Yurong. It was also because he was very clear that although this would cause his injuries to become extremely severe, as long as he could maintain the state of sword rest for 49 days, he should be able to heal the injuries in his body. Right now, many days had already passed. There were still several days until he woke up from the state of sword rest. He wanted to wake up ahead of time. Even if he was heavily injured, he still wanted to wake up. Because starting from many days ago, many voices had been constantly transmitted into his ears. There were cries of alarm, voices of concern, voices of discussion, and then there were cries of alarm. Third junior brother was dead. Liang Xiao was dead. Qiu Shanjun's Tao heart felt like it had suffered a heavy blow. His grief was at its peak, and at the same time, his rage was at its peak. Who was it who dared to kill a fellow disciple of my Mount Li? Dared to kill a person of my 7 laws? Dared to kill my junior brother? But he could do nothing. He could only listen to the sect master's trembling voice, as well as the whispers that gradually faded into the distance. In the dark world of sword rest, Qiu Shanjun gradually regained his calm. He vaguely sensed that there was something wrong with the situation. After a few days, junior brother Qi Jian was carried back and carried into the sect master's dwelling, placed on the bed across from him. At the moment, on the highest peak of Mount Li, 2 unconscious disciples were lying on the ground. Who had done this? Just what had happened in the Garden of Zhou. Qiu Shanjun calmly, even callously, pondered. He was like a sword resting in its sheath, ready to reveal its edge at any time. With his eyes closed, he heard many names. Zhixiu, Zhuang Huanyu, Chen Changxing. Was it like this? So it was like this. Chapter 407. In the dwelling at the peak of Mount Li, there were several more unconscious people today, lying between Qiu Shanjun and Qi Jian's sleeping mattresses. Their wounds, which had been simply bandaged, were still oozing blood. The scene seemed rather bloody. Several dozen Mount Li disciples stood outside the dwelling. Bai Kai stood at the very front, one hand supporting the sect master and the other holding a sword. His face was rather pale, not only because he was a little scared of blood, but also because his emotions were in turmoil. Of course, this turmoil did not refer to fear. Since he was scared of blood, he was definitely not a real Bai Kai. This youth with a very strange name was an inner disciple of the Mount Li sword sect. He was ranked 6th among the Divine State's 7 laws and was at the later stage of meditation. The emotion raging in his chest was anger. The Mount Li sword sect's expression was very grave, but his body was very weak. He was a mighty figure who had shaken the heavenly south region, yet he couldn't even stand properly. He had to be supported by his younger disciples in order to stand properly. The stone plateau and mountain path outside the dwelling were covered in blood and sword slashes. It was obvious that an extremely bitter battle had just occurred. In the early morning, several elders suddenly brought their disciples to the main peak and requested that Qi Jian be handed over to the discipline hall for interrogation. When the sect master of the Mount Li Sword sect rejected this suggestion, a battle suddenly broke out. The heavily injured person in the cave, the bloodstains and broken swords outside the cave, were the tragic results of this battle. Shameless to the extreme, Bai Kai looked at Elder Xiao Songgong at the front of the crowd and rebuked in both grief and anger. You dare conspire to harm the sect master. Do you want to betray Mount Li? At the moment, Go Hanshi, Liang Banhu, and Guan Feibai were still comprehending the Tao in the capital's mausoleum of books. Qiu Shanjun and Qi Jian were still heavily injured, and of the Divine State's 7 laws, only Bai Kai remained. Several of the second-generation martial uncles were trapped in the belly of the mountain, so he had to stand at the very front. Although he was the Mount Li Sword sect's most favored junior disciple and had a very special status, in normal times, he would have been extremely courteous to an elder like Xiao Songgong and would never have dared to say such words. But now he was truly furious. If the sect master had not been injured in the Garden of Zhou, even if Xiao Songgong had ambushed him, how could he have been so heavily injured? If the martial uncles hadn't been trapped in the sword formation in the belly of the mountain, these people wouldn't have dared to come to the peak. The mountain breeze caressed Xiao Songgong's white eyebrows. The morning light shone on his emotionless face. His usual transcendent demeanor had already been completely replaced by a callous and unyielding aura. He sternly yelled, "Just who wants to betray Mount Li? We only request that the sect master follow the ironclad laws of Mount Li and hand over the disciple Qi Jian, who is suspected of colluding with the demons, to the discipline hall for interrogation. Why do you not agree?" Xiao Songgong stared at the pale-faced Mount Li sect master and said with a hint of ruthlessness, "Can you tell me the reason?" The Mount Li sect master looked at him, his somewhat gloomy eyes brimming with indifference and sorrow, as if he had seen through everything. "Then, senior brother, can you tell me the reason? Why did you use the secret method left behind by Master and trap them in the belly of the mountain when they were preparing to go to the north to rescue youngest uncle through the sword formation? Why do you have fellow Taoists from the Longevity sect standing behind you? And also, the patriarch of the Qiushan clan? And also, why did you strike me with that palm earlier?" As these words left his mouth, the whistling of swords grew louder under the morning light. Several dozen flying swords circled around the peak of the mountain where the dwelling was located, flying at high speeds, drawing out rays of golden light. This was a part of Mount Li's myriad sword array. Seeing these flying swords, the people who had followed Xiao Songgong up the mountain all had grave expressions, including the upper-level star condensation elder of the Longevity sect and the guardian of the Qiushan clan with unfathomable strength. Only the patriarch of the Qiushan clan seemed oblivious. How profound was the Mount Li sect master's cultivation? Even though he was heavily injured and powerless to fight, his heart of the sword still existed. His words were like sharp swords, making it impossible to respond. The 2 discipline hall elders that had been standing behind Xiao Songgong this entire time revealed expressions of shame. Even Xiao Songgong's expression changed several times, and then he turned to the Longevity sect elder. Previously, after Xiao Songgong's sneak attack had succeeded, the sect master had used the last of his sword intent to awaken a part of the myriad sword array, protecting the dwelling and simultaneously isolating the peaks of Mount Li. Several of the second-generation star condensation experts of Mount Li had been trapped in the belly of the mountain by Xiao Songgong's secret method. He did not want the disciples of the other peaks to come to their rescue only to be injured by Xiao Songgong's faction. But at the same time, he had activated the sound amplification technique of the myriad sword's rumbling thunder, so all the words spoken on the summit could be heard by the peaks of Mount Li. If possible, Xiao Songgong naturally did not want to answer the sect master's questions. But in the current situation, if he wanted to smoothly seize authority over Mount Li and convince the masses, he had to give an extremely convincing answer. The Longevity sect elder expressionlessly said, "Why? Because we suspect that you're colluding with the demons." Hearing this, the Mount Li disciples standing by the sect master's side were enraged and could not help but curse. Bai Kai was so angry that his entire face turned red, and the hand that gripped his sword began to tremble. There were even curses coming from one of the nearby mountains. The Mountly sect master was a person of virtue and prestige. He treated all his disciples equally, and even in the entire South, he was renowned for his benevolence. Yet now, this longevity sect elder was actually accusing him of colluding with the demons. How can anyone endure this? The Tinsum Mountains began to boil, but at this moment, the only people present were the third-generation disciples, as well as some outer sect disciples with even lower cultivations. They simply had no way of breaking through the myriad sword array and coming to the rescue, so they could only curse. The longevity sect elder's skin was truly extremely thick. His expression did not change as he said, before Mountly disciple Liang Xiaoxiao died, he accused Qi Jian of colluding with the demons, Wofuzhixio, and Qin Changsheng to begin a massacre in the Garden of Zhou. It was precisely because of this that Qiushan Jun fell into a coma. As Qiushan Jun's teacher, why have you delayed for so many days and refused to hand Qi Jian over to the discipline hall for interrogation? Just what are you trying to hide? How can people not suspect that you're also colluding with the demons? Since when did the longevity sect have the right to interfere in the matters of my Mountly? The Mountly sect master looked at the longevity sect elder and said, don't say any nonsense about the longevity sect being the ancestral court of the South. Back then, Junior Marshal Uncle killed all the elders of the longevity sect. Do you really think that my Mountly would listen to you? Truly naive and childish to the extreme. Hearing these words, the Tinsum Mountains of Mount Li exploded with thunderous laughter. There were even some disciples who praised the sect master's assessment. Bai Kai and the other disciples even roared with laughter. Paired with the blood and swords covering the ground, the atmosphere spontaneously rose. Xiao Songgong noticed that the disciples loyal to him and the other two elders had rather uneasy expressions and couldn't help but feel regret. He thought to himself, I was only thinking that Mountly is a subordinate of the longevity sect, so I agreed to let the longevity sect elder accompany me. I forgot that in these Tinsum years, because of Su Li, the disciples of Mount Li had no respect for the longevity sect, only hostility. No matter what, Elder Ji is still an elder of the same sect. Junior brother, you should still be a little more respectful. Xiao Songgong coldly said to the sect master, if you don't want others to suspect that you are colluding with the demons, then hand over Qi Jian. When the time comes, I will personally apologize to you, then cut off one of my arms and seclude myself in the back of the mountain for 500 years. These words were extremely unyielding, actually causing the jeering and cursing of the peaks of Mount Li to stop. The sect master calmly gazed at Xiao Songgong and sighed, thinking to himself, if you weren't certain that I wouldn't hand over Qi Jian, you wouldn't have dared to swear such a venomous oath. Just this matter, he asked, looking into Xiao Songgong's eyes. Xiao Songgong made no concession. Staring into his eyes, he hatefully said, the magic sword naturally has to be handed over as well, and then you have to hand over the myriad sword array. The Mountly sect master calmly asked, everything has been handed over. Presumably, my position as sect master will also have to be handed over. Xiao Songgong said nothing, tacitly agreeing. Bai Kai angrily retorted, why is it that when you say that junior brother is colluding with the demons, he is colluding with the demons? A discipline hall elder who had been silent all this time suddenly said, the one who accused Qi Jian of colluding with the demons was not us, but your deceased third brother. This discipline hall elder had an extremely high prestige in Mount Li. He was normally very strict in enforcing the law and was the most just and fair. There was not a single disciple of the various peaks that dared to submit to him. Hearing his words, Bai Kai was momentarily speechless, and even the disciples of the various peaks fell silent. The discipline hall elder turned to the sect master and sighed. Why are you not willing to let the discipline hall interrogate him? The Mountly sect master calmly replied, because I do not believe that Qi Jian would commit such an evil deed. The discipline hall elder sternly said, Even if your other disciple, Liang Xiao, personally accused him and he's already dead. The Mount Li sect master was quiet for a while, then replied, yes. The Discipline Hall elder asked, since you don't believe him, why are you not willing to let the Discipline Hall interrogate him? The Mount Li sect master looked at him in silence for a very long time. Finally, he said, because I do not trust the Discipline Hall. There was a slight uproar in the mountains. Bai Kai and the other disciples had fought a bloody battle to protect the dwelling. But when they heard the sect master's words, they also found it somewhat difficult to believe. It must be known that Mount Li's Discipline Hall was the most just and had never done anything improper. The Discipline Hall elder's eyebrows slightly twitched, clearly very angry. He asked, may I ask, Lord Sect Master, in these past 100 years, has the Discipline Hall ever done anything unjust? If not, why is it not trustworthy? Because you do not trust Junior Martial Uncle, the Sect Master said to the two Discipline Hall elders. The Discipline Hall elder asked, why do you say this? The Sect Master explained, when you enter the mausoleum of books and swore a blood oath to become monolith guardians, Junior Martial Uncle flew into a rage when he heard this. He charged into the mausoleum of books and forcefully took you away. Every time the common people mention this matter, they always praise my Mount Li for acting like the bright moon and cool breeze, but I am keenly aware that you have always felt that you would never have the chance to enter the divine domain because Junior Martial Uncle took you out of the mausoleum of books. You always felt that Junior Martial Uncle had let you down. This was an extremely famous event of the past. But only this morning did many Mount Li disciples realize that those two Mount Li disciples who had been forcefully taken away from the mausoleum of books by their martial grandaunts were actually the two Discipline Hall elders who were later renowned for their incorruptibility. The other Discipline Hall elder who had not spoken suddenly said in a hoarse voice, could it be that Junior Martial Uncle had not let us down? The sect master painfully replied, the mausoleum of books is a holy land and also an abyss. It's been open for so many years, and you still haven't understood? Junior Martial Uncle did not hesitate to offend the Li Palace in order to give you true freedom, but you held a grudge for so many years. How absurd. Chapter 408. The Discipline Hall elder expressionlessly said, in all matters, we ask about the actions, not the hearts, and this is even more true for obeying the law. Regardless of sect master's opinion of us, according to the laws of Mount Li, Qi Jian's disciples should be interrogated by the Discipline Hall. Bai Kai angrily said, Martial Uncle Hong, if we ask about the actions and not the hearts, then besides the glance that third brother gave her before he died, did junior brother commit any mistakes? Just what did he do that he needs to be interrogated by the Discipline Hall? Xiao Songgong sneered at him. Although Liang Xiao only glanced at her, he clearly said that the wolf cub was the true culprit who had colluded with the demons to bring chaos to the Garden of Zhou. And in the Garden of Zhou, even in the entire Garden of Zhou, there are at least several hundred pairs of eyes that clearly saw Qi Jian and that wolf cub embracing and exchanging flirtatious glances. Just what is the relationship between them? The vast majority of people did not understand the meaning of Elder Xiao Songgong's words. But those who knew of Qi Jian's past suddenly had a change of expression. Without waiting for these people to speak, Xiao Songgong yelled, Qi Jian is Junior Martial Uncle's own daughter. All the peaks were in an uproar. As a woman, she actually dared to hook up with a wolf tribe demi-human, actually having a physical relationship. Does she even have any shame? Where does she place the clean reputation of my Mount Li? Why can't the Discipline Hall interrogate her? Xiao Songgong's cold and malicious voice reverberated through the peak, simultaneously being transmitted through the array to all the other peaks. For a moment, all the peaks were silent. The Mount Li disciples were shocked, speechless. Junior brother Qi Jian was actually a woman, and she was Martial Granduncle's own daughter? Were these things all true? Xiao Songgong stared into the sect leader's eyes and said mockingly, if she wasn't youngest Martial Uncle's daughter, how could you spoil her so much? Whatever she wants, you give it to her. Have Han Shi and the others ever received such treatment? Even Xiu Shan, Have you treated him as well as Qi Jian? Do you think I don't know? You even want to pass on the position of sect master to her." Hearing these words, the disciples of Mount Li were even more shocked. Bai Kai was very anxious and wanted to say a few words, but he was stopped by the sect master. The sect leader looked at Xiao Songgong and shook his head. His face revealed a hint of mockery and sorrow. He indeed doted on Qi Jian, far above Gohan Shi and the others. Even Xiao Shan could not compare, but that was not because Qi Jian was his youngest martial uncle's daughter or his last disciple, but because Qi Jian was a girl. The sect leader knew that Xiao Shan and the others all understood and accepted such a simple logic. That was why in these past few years, they had especially doted on Qi Jian. He believed that Xiao Songgong also understood, but why would he listen now? Xiao Songgong did not stop his attack because of the sect master's silence. He looked at him and coldly said, "The position of sect master of the Mount Li Sword Sect is not yours. If you want to pass it on to Qi Jian, you have to see if we agree or not." The sect master calmly asked him, "Then in your view, who should be the sect master of the Mount Li Sword Sect?" Xiao Songgong coldly said, "The position of Mount Li Sword Sect's sect master should belong to martial nephew Qiao Shan in the future." These words were very forceful. Whether it was the disciples of the various peaks, or even Bai Kai supporting the sect master, they all felt that these words were only right and proper. The entire Mount Li Sword Sect, even the entire world, had long since tacitly agreed on this point. In the end, it's still the position of sect master. The sect master sighed as he looked at Xiao Songgong, his eyes brimming with pity, even sympathy. "When will senior brother learn to look a little further?" Xiao Songgong was inexplicably angered by the sect master's gaze. He yelled, "Could it be that you think I'm a person who covets power and position? Could it be that you think that I offended my superior today for my own benefit?" The sect master calmly smiled. "Or perhaps you might be doing it for the benefit of the entire human world." There was no doubt that this was sarcasm. Bai Kai, who was supporting the sect master, began to laugh. The several dozen Mount Li disciples in front of the dwelling, their clothes stained with blood, also began to laugh. Only Xiao Songgong, the two discipline hall elders, and their disciples found it impossible to laugh. Xiao Songgong took a deep breath, then said, "Hand over the myriad sword array, abdicate, and let Qi Jian stand trial. I will only manage it for 5 years, then retire to the back of the mountain and hand over the sect master to martial nephew Qiao Shan." The sect master ignored him. He turned to the two discipline hall elders and asked, "Two senior brothers, do you also support this proposal?" The discipline hall elder expressionlessly said, "Sect master, whether or not you abdicate is not up to the discipline hall to decide, but if you insist on not handing over Qi Jian, the discipline hall will demand that you temporarily hand over your authority." The sect master calmly said, "Two senior brothers want to speak of sect rules, so I will speak of sect rules." The discipline hall elder expressionlessly said, "Sect master, please speak." Junior martial uncle is currently trapped in the north. The Mount Li sword array has already been in operation for many days, only waiting for concrete news. Yesterday afternoon, we received news that junior martial uncle had appeared in Xuanyang City. The 3 elders of the Sword Hall led the elites of the sect into the sword array, preparing to go to Xuanyang City to receive junior martial uncle. Who could have expected that Elder Xiao Songgong would collude with outsiders from the longevity sect and secretly destroy the sword array last night, trapping the 3 elders of the Sword Hall and the elites of my Mount Li in the belly of the mountain? If my disciple Qi Jian and the wolf youth supporting each other in the Garden of Zhou is a crime, then may I ask the 2 discipline hall elders, just what crime is this? The sect master looked at the 2 discipline hall elders and asked, "Right now, junior martial uncle is heavily injured and isolated and helpless. If he were to die at the hands of those rascals, since my 2 senior brothers do not hold a grudge against junior martial uncle, because of the old matter of the mausoleum of books, shouldn't you first cripple Elder Xiao Songgong's cultivation and throw him into the discipline hall's prison?" The discipline hall elders said nothing. The sect master looked at the two, a mocking smile on his face. Bai Kai spat on the ground in front of him, utterly shameless. After a moment of silence, the peaks of Mount Li began to resound with countless angry curses. If Su Li is my Mount Li martial uncle, then Elder Xiao Songgong's actions are naturally the great crime of betraying the mountain. A discipline hall elder suddenly said. But if Su Li himself is guilty of the great crime of betraying the mountain, then Elder Xiao Songgong's actions are not a crime to speak of. On the contrary, they are a great merit. The Mount Li sect master slightly narrowed his eyes. He said nothing, but his ridicule was plain for all to see. Bai Kai, who was supporting him, sneered, "Fabricate, continue to fabricate. I'm afraid that not even Second Brother and Chun Changsheng have read the books you've written." Su Li has always been a madman. Xiao Songgong coldly said, "Back then, the person who stopped the northern expedition was him. And in these 10-odd years, the person who stopped the confluence of the north and south is also him. Just what does he want to do? He's not as old as us, and he entered the sect later than we did. If not for his good luck, why should we call him Martial Uncle? Just where does he want to take Mount Li? You don't care, but the disciples of Mount Li naturally do." At this point, neither Xiao Songgong nor the two discipline hall elders called Su Li Martial Uncle, but directly by his name. The people who had charged into the main peak of Mount Li had finally made clear their intentions. They wanted to use Liang Xiaoxiao's death to make trouble for Qi Jian, and ultimately use this matter to completely erase Su Li's influence from Mount Li. Of course, all of this was built on a single foundation. Su Li had to die. The next chapter should be written before 1230. Chapter 409. The sect master indicated that Bai Kai should not support him and slowly took 2 steps forward. Separated by those several dozen bright sword glows, he gazed at those once familiar senior brothers, those somewhat familiar disciples, and those experts from the longevity sect and the Qiushan clan. The corners of his lips slowly perked up into a mocking smile. For 10,000 autumns, the confluence of the north and south, for the human world, to resist the demons. These 4 words were spoken with a mocking smile, yet they were so bright and dignified. In this way, even the brightest and most dignified words or reasons should all be mocked, because these were all excuses. Was it the Pope or the Divine Empress that promised you these benefits? The sect master's gaze slowly moved over Xiao Songgong and the 2 discipline hall elders, ultimately resting on the Qiushan clan head. The Qiushan clan head slightly lowered his head in greeting, silently smiling. It was like he had no idea what sort of tense situation he was in. Yes, the confluence of the north and south, the unification of the human world, victory over the demons, these are all benefits. These are the benefits of killing Su Li. No matter how much you mock us, this is still a benefit. Xiao Songgong looked at the sect master and said, "For the future of my Mount Li sword sect, for the well-being and happiness of the 10,000 families of the South, no matter how selfish you say we are, how can this benefit not be tempting?" The sect master fell silent for a very long time. Suddenly, he raised his right hand and took out a sword from the several dozen streams of light. This was the stream of light of the myriad sword array, and only he could so casually perform this action. Xiao Songgong said, "It seems that you still haven't thought it through." The sect master replied, "Because I still haven't thought it through. You say that Junior Martial Uncle betrayed the sect. Just where did this crime come from? Just like Luer and Bai Kai said, if you want to fabricate something, you should make up a more plausible story." The crowd turned to Xiao Songgong and the 2 discipline hall elders. Even the Qiushan clan head and that guardian of unfathomable strength who had followed them up the mountain were the same. The summit was quiet for a very long time. Finally, the discipline hall elders said, "Su Li has gone against the flow, always obstructing the confluence of the north and south. We suspect that he is colluding with the demons." The sect master shook his head in speechlessness, then sighed, "Truly shameless." The Qiushan clan head also couldn't help but shake his head, most likely feeling that this explanation was too nonsensical. Martial Uncle has fought with the demon experts for many years. Who knows how many demons have been killed by his sword? If it weren't for him, how could the demons be so well-behaved in the snowy plains all these years? Today, he is like a dragon swimming in the shallows, being trapped in Xuanyang City by those despicable and shameless fellows precisely because he wanted to kill the demon military advisor Blackrobe, falling into the demon's encirclement and sustaining heavy injuries. The sect master looked at the discipline hall elder and said, "Those people of Xuanyang City are very shameless, but you actually say that martial uncle is colluding with the demons. This has already surpassed the boundaries of shamelessness, reaching a level that is inhuman." He said these words slowly and seriously, but his emotions were strong. The disciples of the various peaks also reacted intensely, throwing all sorts of filthy words at the main peak. It must be known that Suli was not only their martial granduncle, but also the spirit of the entire Mount Li. He was the idol of all the young disciples. So how could they allow these elders to slander him? Xiao Songgong sneered, "It's just an act." The sect master yelled, "Senior brother, if you don't have proof, just based on these words of yours, I can expel you from Mount Li." Xiao Songgong stared into his eyes, a smile that was not a smile. "You really want proof? You must know that although that matter from back then is no longer brought up by anyone, the test paper from that year's blood test should still be hidden in the Li Palace." Hearing these words, the sect master's expression turned grave. What matter are you referring to?" Xiao Songgong sneered. "There has never been an absolute secret in this world. Did Suli think that by killing all those people by the cold pool, he could conceal this matter?" The sect master's gaze became extremely sharp as he yelled, "Shut your mouth. If you dare to act recklessly, don't blame me for shattering my sword heart and using the myriad sword array to kill everyone on the mountain." Hearing these words, the people on the peaks of Mount Li couldn't help but shiver. Such a powerful killing intent, such fierce methods. Could it be that this internal strife of Mount Li would ultimately lead to such a bitter conclusion? Just what was the secret that Xiao Songgong spoke of? Could it be that these disciples aren't disciples of Mount Li? Just because you wanted to conceal that secret, they all had to die? Xiao Songgong stared at him and sneered. "If you really use such a vicious method, I'd really like to see how you'll meet the ancestors of Mount Li after you die. I originally didn't want to expose this secret, but now that I've been forced by all of you, I have no choice but to tell the entire continent that Qi Jian is not only Su Li's daughter, she is also..." He gazed at the dwelling behind the sect master and the several dozen disciples. Separated by that heavy door, he seemed to see the unconscious Qi Jian. He coldly yelled, "She is also the daughter of a demon princess." The sect master angrily yelled, "Shut your mouth." Xiao Songgong showed no fear. With disdain, he continued, "She is the daughter of Su Li and a demon princess." All the peaks of Mount Li were in an uproar, shouting and cursing incessantly. How could anyone believe this? And yet, Xiao Songgong's words still reverberated through the peaks of Mount Li. As he spoke, the voices of the peaks grew quieter and quieter. Back then, why did the longevity sect imprison that woman in the cold pool? Why did the elders have the confidence to demand that Su Li do such a great deed in order to atone for his crimes? Because Su Li had already committed a heinous crime. Xiao Songgong thought of that world-shaking event from 10-odd years ago and suddenly felt the wind on the mountains grow somewhat colder. It's just that who could have imagined that Su Li would be so daring as to kill 10-odd elders of the longevity sect for the sake of a demon girl? Just how many experts did the human world lose because of this? You actually dare to say that he couldn't have colluded with the demons? The shouting and cursing suddenly stopped, and all the peaks of Mount Li fell deathly silent. Because everyone vaguely felt that this matter might be true, they were incomparably shocked. Even the head of the Qiushan clan and the Guardian couldn't help but raise their brows. Only that elder of the longevity sect was as calm as before, but his eyes flickered with cruelty and the pleasure of avenging a great vengeance. Presumably, he had long since known of this matter. The Mount Li disciples gaped in speechlessness. Previously, when Xiao Songgong had revealed Qi Jian's past, everyone could still accept it. Because of their martial granduncle, they even felt a great deal of love, pity, and reverence for Qi Jian. But now it was a completely different feeling. She was the daughter of a demon princess. Martial granduncle actually had such a past with a demon princess after an unknown amount of time. A somewhat uneasy voice broke the silence. A Mountly disciple standing in front of the dwelling looked at the sect master and asked in a trembling voice, "Martial uncle's sect master, this matter, is it true?" Chapter 410. That Mountly disciple stood in front of the cave, his clothes stained with blood, but he had not retreated half a step or revealed the slightest timidity. His loyalty and courage were naturally not to be questioned, yet he could not help but ask this question. All the peaks were quiet for the same reason. The vast majority of Mountly disciples had firmly stood on the sect master's side, furious at the shameless actions of Xiao Songgong and the other two elders. But now, there was a change. Su Li was the idol of Mountly. But if Elder Xiao Songgong's words were true, then this idol was gradually crumbling. A disciple's voice came from refined rock, peak up ahead. If senior brother Qi Jian really is a descendant of the demons, then perhaps we really should have the discipline hall properly interrogate him. Bai Kai was enraged by these words, but before he had time to say anything, he saw a Mountly disciple at his side kneel with a thud, repeatedly cowing to the sect master's back until blood seeped out of his forehead. "Master, if junior brother really is the daughter of martial granduncle and a demon princess, why do you need to protect him?" A few days ago, it was said that junior brother caused the death of third senior brother. I didn't believe it at all, but if the filthy and smelly blood of the devil clan flows in her body, and she colluded with the wolf clan's demon, then what could she not do? The sect master gazed at this disciple who was usually the most respectful to him and lightly sighed. This disciple's entire family had been killed by the demon army, so how could he still blame him? Bai Kai looked at these two disciples and listened to the discussion rising from the distant peaks. His anger flared even more, and he yelled, "A solemn disciple of Mount Li is actually bewildered by the bewitching words of an enemy. Where has your sword heart gone?" The various peaks grew somewhat quieter, and the main peak did the same. Xiao Songgong sneered and said to him, "If your sword heart really is pure, then why do you only dare to yell at your fellow disciples, but not dare to ask your master if this matter is true or false?" Bai Kai angrily glared at him, but he clenched his teeth and said nothing. So-called silence sometimes represented extreme anger, sometimes it meant that there was nothing to say, and sometimes it was tacit approval. Ever since Xiao Songgong had said that Qi Jian was the daughter of a demon princess and Su Li, some time had passed. The Mountly sect master stood in front of the cave, his demeanor desolate and silent. His meaning was actually very clear. The several dozen Mountly disciples in front of the dwelling, and even more Mountly disciples in the various peaks, were all looking at the sect master. Even now, they were still loyal to Mountly, supporting the sect master and disdaining Xiao Songgong and those two discipline hall elders. But now, they had already begun to believe that Qi Jian and even Su Li had a relationship with the demons. Otherwise, why would third senior brother Liang Xiao look at her with such a complicated and painful gaze before he died? Even Cabbage's sword heart was somewhat shaken, his emotions somewhat perplexed. 10 years ago, Mount Li and the entire human world had been thrown into chaos because of two women. 10 years later, this matter finally returned to Mount Li and began to change its situation. At this moment, the Mountly sect master finally spoke once more. He looked into Xiao Songgong's eyes and said, "You shouldn't know about this, because the people who knew about this back then have all died. Other than the 3 saints and me, no one else knows about this, not even the demon monarch." "Then, how did you know?" This was a very difficult question to answer, so Xiao Songgong's expression abruptly chilled, and he had no intention of opening his mouth to answer. Even if the Tianhai Divine Empress and His Holiness the Pope wanted to kill Junior Martial Uncle, the Tao heart of a saint floats in the sea of stars. It is impossible to violate the oath made back then, and the other saint is even less likely to harm junior martial uncle. The sect master did not explain why that saint would not harm Su Li. He spoke as if it were a matter of course. Then he continued to ask, "Then, how did you know about this secret?" Xiao Songgong sneered. "I said before, there are no absolute secrets in the world." With a grave and stern expression, the sect master said, "Back then, when junior martial uncle went north to Xuanyang City, he killed everyone in the Liang household who knew about this matter. The divine empress and his holiness also acted to purge this matter, all for the sake of protecting this secret. I would very much like to know just who the three of them left out." Xiao Songgong's expression turned cold. It was only now that he knew that behind that bloodbath all those years ago was the will of these three powerful figures. The sect master continued, "If you cannot state the source of this information, then I can only assume that it was Black Robe's doing." This was a very crude deduction, but in the Eastern continent, it was the most convincing deduction. This was because in the human world, the land of demons and the demi-human race, there was a perception that was close to truth. Black Robe knew all the secrets of the world. If it really was Black Robe who told you, you said that junior martial uncle colluded with the demons, then what about you? The demon military advisor used your hands to destroy the foundation of my Mount Li. Does this count as collusion? He was truly worthy of being called the sect master of the Mount Li sword sect. His words were like swords. He had suffered heavy injuries from the sneak attack, but this rebuke brimming with anger and fighting spirit still resounded like thunder through the peaks of Mount Li, causing all the discussions within the peaks to come to a screeching halt. The situation had once more changed. The two Discipline Hall elders clearly did not know the source of this information, so they subconsciously turned to Xiao Songgong. Xiao Songgong finally could not endure the might of words as swords. His face slightly pale, he said, "It was Liang Xiao who left behind a will before he died." The sect master was silent upon hearing this, then said, "So it was like this." He turned to the longevity sect elder and said, "I still remember that it was you, Senior Jiang, who sent those two children to Mount Li. Now that I think about it, he already knew of his past at that time." Elder Jiang was silent for a while, then said, "I don't know when he knew of his past. I also only found out about this matter when I saw the will that Zhuang Huanyu secretly sent to the longevity sect." The sect master said, "Banhu clearly did not know of his past, and even more, did not know of that major event that year. Xiao was slightly younger, so why did Elder Liang entrust the matter of vengeance to him?" Elder Jiang said, "Perhaps Elder Liang had already realized 10 years ago that Liang Banhu was too sincere and was far from being as ruthless and steady as his younger brother." This was indeed the case. In terms of ruthlessness and steadiness, within the younger generation, who could be Liang Xiao's opponent? Even if he was already dead, a young genius, whose cultivation was only at ethereal opening. Yet, for the sake of sacrifice, he dared to let a saint go through the sea of bitterness. He used his own death to raise countless waves in Mount Li. To deal with Qin Changsheng and Wofuzhixiu, that was only a smokescreen, a method he used to muddy the waters. Of course, it was also something he was willing to do in passing. His true goal had always been Mount Li. Su Li, Liang Xiao was keenly aware that he would never have the chance to kill Su Li in his entire life. Even if he wanted to secretly injure Qi Jian, it would be very difficult. Thus, he chose the most desperate path, using the most extreme method. He wanted to destroy Qi Jian's reputation. A matter like reputation did not require any evidence. It only required malicious guesses to destroy it. Moreover, in the eyes of the world, he was the senior brother who most doted on Qi Jian. He wanted to destroy Su Li's legend. A matter like a legend was the most sacred and dignified. It was also the easiest to stigmatize. This was because Su Li himself had done far too many things that could easily be stigmatized. He and that unfathomable demon military advisor in the distant snowy plains, one in the south and one in the north, coordinated with each other from a distance. Thus, they laid down 2 layers of killing traps in and around the Garden of Zhou and at Mount Li in Xuanyang. For this, he only needed to pay the price of his life, then leave behind a gaze and a will. Before his death, he had presumably calculated that although he was dead, countless people would follow his arrangements to continue this trap, using his gaze and will to continue fighting. The entire world would take revenge for him, take revenge for his ancestors. It could be believed that in the moment he stopped breathing outside the Garden of Zhou, Liang Xiaoxiao was calm and joyous. Xiao Songgong said nothing. The two Discipline Hall elders said nothing, and the longevity sect's elder Jiang also said nothing. The sect master stood behind the several dozen sword glows, calmly gazing at the sword gripped in his right hand. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. They were all experts of the present age at the upper level of star condensation. A junior like Liang Xiaoxiao could be easily killed with a wave of their hands. Yet now that they completely understood Liang Xiaoxiao's intentions and what he had done, they inexplicably felt a sense of reverence towards this already deceased junior. If they knew that Zhou Tong had once said that Liang Xiaoxiao was his best successor, perhaps they would feel the same way. In a very short amount of time, the Mount Li sect master seemed to have aged a little. He understood everything, and a faint sense of disappointment and frustration appeared in his heart. Liang Xiaoxiao had always lived in hatred since he was young, yet he even had to hide it from his own brother. Just what sort of pain was that? Why had he never noticed anything strange about him? The silence was finally broken in the next moment. The speaker was the head of the Qiushan clan. In the early morning, he had followed Xiao Songgong and the others to the main peak of Mount Li. Afterwards, the head of the Qiushan clan and the guardian with unfathomable cultivation had not spoken a single word, even though their positions had already made their positions clear. This matter has to be resolved, the head of the Qiushan clan warmly said to the sect master. This clan head of a prestigious clan of the south even had a smile on his face, yet his words were unyielding. Since the blood of the demons flows through Qi Jian's body, it should naturally be handed over to the Discipline Hall for interrogation. Sir Su Li concealing this matter is also responsible, but since he has already died in Xuanyang City, this matter will naturally be dropped. As for Sect Master, I think that it really is time for you to abdicate. These were all the demands that Sir Xiao Songgong had made, and the head of the Qiushan clan once more reiterated them. The disciples of Mount Li on the various peaks once more grew nervous. This was an internal strife, a confrontation between two factions that had even surpassed the boundaries of Mount Li. This was a confrontation between two great factions of the South, and what they were fighting over was the position of Mount Li's sect master, the hilt of 10,000 swords that could pierce through the clouds. Up until now, not much blood had been shed. Could it be that Mount Li would really be dyed in blood today? Crucially, although these words were a reiteration, they came from the mouth of the Qiushan clan head. This was even more unyielding and forceful than Xiao Songgong's just now. It was not only because of the status of the Qiushan clan in the south, but also because he was Qiushan Jun's father. The next chapter is to strive for 12. Chapter 411. The Qiushan clan was naturally an extraordinary existence in the south, but the current Qiushan clan head did not have much of a reputation. Whether in terms of cultivation or knowledge, they were all mediocre. There was even a saying in the continent that the talent of the Qiushan clan had all rested on Qiushan Jun alone, to the point that his father was so ordinary. Similar discussions were taking place in the capital of the Great Zhou dynasty. Although Divine General of the East Su Shiji was deeply trusted by the Divine Empress and had an extremely high status in the Great Zhou army, everyone knew that this was because he had a good daughter. Compared to his daughter, Su Yurong, whether in terms of talent in the art of war or intelligence, Su Shiji was eclipsed. Many people did not understand how Su Shiji and the Qiushan clan head could produce Su Yurong and Qiushan Jun. But this was the truth. Just like at this moment, the words of the Qiushan clan head were even more powerful than those of Xiao Songgong, because he was Qiushan Jun's father. In Mount Li, Qiushan Jun was the most special person, even an anomaly. In the hearts of the disciples of the younger generation, He was the only person that could be mentioned in the same breath as Martial Granduncle Su Li, even if his current cultivation was still incomparably far from Su Li's, and even the sect master in a certain sense did not have as high a prestige as Qiu Shanjun. From the sect master to the most ordinary disciple, there was not a single person that did not like Qiu Shanjun. From the unsmiling discipline hall elder to the callous and violent Guan Feibai to the demi-human servant that had been punished to sweep leaves in the back mountain for 40-some years, everyone that saw Qiu Shanjun would reveal the most sincere smile and give him the greatest kindness. Any kindness and affection was mutual. In the 10-some years that Qiu Shanjun had lived in Mount Li, he had given every person that lived here enough kindness and affection. As for this so-called prestige, it was like 10,000 trickles forming a river. It was also forged from the contributions he had made to Mount Li in these 10-some years. To put it simply, he had shed blood for Mount Li, shed a lot of blood. So when the Qiu clan head spoke, all of Mount Li would quietly and earnestly listen. But at this moment, no one knew that on the sickbed in the dwelling, the right index finger of the young man that had been unconscious for several dozen days, hanging by the bedside, slightly twitched. This was originally an internal affair of the Mount Li sword sect. Logically speaking, my Qiu clan has no right to say anything. The Qiu clan head looked at the sect master, looked at the several dozen Mount Li disciples in front of the dwelling, and calmly said, "But the current situation is that Sir Su Li and Qi Jian are suspected of colluding with the demons, stirring up a storm of blood within the Garden of Zhou. And it is precisely because of the opening of the Garden of Zhou and the infiltration of the demons that my son, Qiu Shan, has used up all of his essence blood. Right now, he is still unconscious, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. I think that, as his father, I have the right to replace him and ask everyone in the Mount Li sword sect to do something." These words were said to the sect master and those several dozen disciples, and also to the disciples of the various peaks of Mount Li. Countless pairs of eyes fell on the tightly shut stone door of the cave with worry and anxiety. The Mount Li disciples thought to themselves, if it really was as Elder Xiao Songgong said, that all of this was a demon plot, then senior brother Liang Xiao is already dead. Could it be that eldest brother will also pay the price with his life? Could it be that Martial Granduncle really did treat Mount Li as his private property and was determined to pass the position of sect master to Qi Jian and not to eldest brother? How could this be? If all this was true, then the Qiu clan's anger could naturally be understood. All the peaks suddenly fell silent. Bai Kai's expression subtly changed. He knew that this was an extremely bad omen, indicating that the hearts of the people were gradually shifting. However, not even he could say anything about this, because in this entire matter, eldest brother was the most innocent person. Even now, he was still unconscious, and no one knew when he would wake up. The several dozen disciples in front of the cave also turned to the sect master, their expressions rather complex. Xiao Songgong looked at the sect master and expressionlessly said, "Hand over the myriad sword array." The discipline hall elder's voice was like steel and stone. "I must trouble sect master to hand over demon girl Qi Jian." The longevity sect's elder Jiang was calm and speechless. The Qiu clan head calmly said, "I only want an explanation." Previously, the sect master's every word had been like swords, so now it was time for him to bear the rain of swords. These words that pressed him step by step, the hesitation on the faces of the several dozen disciples behind him, and the silence of all the peaks, all of these were swords. Borrowing Liang Xiao's book and Qiu Shan's name, the myriad swords returned to their positions. The change of dynasties, the longevity sect regaining control of the south, the Qiu clan advancing north, the confluence of north and south, the unification of the world, this was truly a magnificent and beautiful picture. As the sect master thought of these scenes, a bitter smile appeared on his face. Xiao Songgong was simply not prepared to give his opponents too much time to think. Looking at the several dozen Mount Li disciples in front of the cave, he harshly yelled, "Your eldest brother was harmed by the demon's scheme. For the sake of the cultivators in the Garden of Zhou, he did not hesitate to consume his essence blood in order to reopen the Garden of Zhou. As a result, he was heavily injured and fell unconscious. Could it be that you want to do something that pleases your enemies and grieves your own? Hurry up and put down the sword in your hands. Otherwise, when your eldest brother wakes up and sees the main peak of Mount Li flowing with rivers of blood and disciples killing each other, just how painful would that be? His words were all imbued with true essence, like countless swords. Although the majority of them had been weakened by the several dozen sword glows protecting the cave, the sharpness of his words still remained. The expressions on the faces of the Mount Li disciples became more and more conflicted. Some people subconsciously lowered their swords, while even more people looked at the sect master, hesitating, waiting for the sect master's final decision. Seeing this scene, Xiao Songgong cursed several times in the depths of his heart. Clenching his teeth, he used his last resort and transmitted to the peaks of Mount Li. Today, I violated the rules of the sect, intruded on the main peak, and disrespected the sect master. As long as the sect master is willing to abdicate the position of sect master and hand over the witch Qi Jian, I will not accept the position of sect master for 5 years, to prove that I do not have any greedy intentions. I will also bind myself and beg for forgiveness. With these words, the peaks were in an uproar. Even those Mount Li disciples who were the most furious at Xiao Songgong's actions today had no choice but to admit that this condition had already displayed sufficient sincerity. The longevity sect elder asked, "Then the position of sect master, who should take it?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Songgong replied, "The disciples trapped in the sword array probably have their own opinions, but in my opinion, it should still be Qiushan." The longevity sect elder smiled. "Isn't he too young?" Xiao Songgong said no more. The Qiushan clan head also said nothing, only indifferently smiled. The several dozen disciples in front of the dwelling looked at each other in dismay. Bai Kai walked to the sect master's side, sword in hand. He always felt very oppressed, but he didn't know what to say. This proposal seemed to be the only solution that everyone in Mount Li was willing to accept. At the very least, it could prevent the internal strife of Mount Li from developing to an unmanageable level. Why was Xiao Songgong willing to pay such an enormous price? The sect master calmly gazed at Xiao Songgong. He noticed that Xiao Songgong and the Qiushan clan head had exchanged glances, and only then did he understand. Just when he was about to sit on the position of sect master of the Mount Li sword sect that he yearned for even in his dreams, he had to hand it over. Moreover, he had to live in seclusion in the back of the mountain and bitterly cultivate to atone for his crimes. The Qiushan clan and the longevity sect would assuredly have to provide sufficient compensation. But was this really a solution that everyone in Mount Li was willing to accept? All the peaks of Mount Li were silent. Everyone was waiting for the sect master's final decision. Just at this moment, a voice came from the dwelling. This voice was very weak, but it was still very bright. It was like the sky that had been obscured by dark clouds for a very long time. As long as the clouds dispersed, it would still be as azure as before. I did not accept, naturally thinking of Sulu. Chapter 412. In the cave, a figure stood in front of the sickbed, looking at the unconscious Qi Jian. His gaze moved from her pale face to her small abdomen that was covered in layers of bandages, and then moved to the faintly green fingers. It grew colder and colder. Hearing the sounds of coercion coming from outside the cave, thinking of the voices he had heard in the sword rest, thinking of the countless voices he had heard in the last several dozen days, his voice also grew colder. "I do not accept." The figure said these 4 words to all of Mount Li, then stood up and walked out of the cave. Hearing his voice, all of Mount Li fell silent. The sect master calmly looked at Xiao Songgong, the corners of his lips perking up, revealing a smile. This smile hid many meanings, but it was no longer bitter. The door to the cave was pushed open, and that figure appeared under the clear blue sky, in front of several hundred gazes. It was a young man, tall and straight. His Mount Li sword garb fluttered in the wind. He had clearly not recovered from his heavy injuries, and his face was pale, but this did not diminish the heroic spirit between his brows, and he also had a free and uninhibited air. Seeing this young man, countless cries of joy rose up from the main peak of Mount Lee. Eldest brother! Eldest brother has woken up! Eldest brother has woken up! Cries of joy quickly spread from the main peak to the other peaks of Mount Lee. For a moment, the mountains were stirred up. Today, Mount Lee's internal strife, the enormous pressure and chill that Marshall Granduncle's old secrets had brought to the disciples had actually been greatly erased. This young man was naturally the eldest brother of the Mount Lee Sword Sect's intersect, the head of the Divine Kingdom's 7 laws, Chioshan Jun. The several dozen Mount Lee disciples in front of the cave rushed forward. Chioshan Jun shook his head, indicating that there was no need to support him. He slowly walked to the front of the steps and first bowed to the sect master, then looked at the people outside the sword glows. His eyes were calm, and even when he saw his own father, he was not moved in the slightest. Seeing Chioshan Jun wake up, everyone had different emotions, but the majority were mostly pleasantly surprised. Even Xiao Songgong and the 2 Discipline Hall elders were not too vigilant. The Chioshan clan head saw this scene and confirmed the prestige his son had in the hearts of the younger generation of Mount Lee. His eyes grew even brighter, and he lightly stroked his short beard. Without waiting for Chioshan Jun to speak, Xiao Songgong spoke first. Marshal nephew Chioshan, you have been unconscious for dozens of days and nights. You should not know what happened. Please wait for a moment. Do not misunderstand. At this moment, in front of the Immortals' cave at the summit of Mount Lee, swords were broken and blood was spilling. The scene looked abnormally bloody. Anyone could imagine that when Chioshan Jun woke up and saw this scene, he would naturally think that Xiao Songgong and the others were trying to force him to abdicate, which was why he had said those 4 words before. Xiao Songgong and the others thought that once they explained the current situation, Chioshan Jun would naturally know what to do. No matter what, Xiao Songgong and the others wanted to obtain Chioshan Jun's support. This was because in this internal strife of Mount Lee, the Chioshan clan was one of the 2 great helpers of their faction. Moreover, Chioshan Jun's position in the hearts of the younger generation of Mount Lee disciples was of the utmost importance in ending this internal strife and helping them take complete control of the situation. After a moment of silence, Chioshan Jun said, "Marshal uncle, please speak." Bai Kai couldn't help but feel anxious. He wanted to say something to his senior apprentice brother. Unexpectedly, the sect master stopped him. He even placed the sword in his hand back into the sword glow in front of the cave. The joy of seeing eldest brother wake up gradually faded. All the peaks fell silent. Everyone once more listened to Xiao Songgong narrate what had happened in the Garden of Zhou, what Suli had done. Elder Xiao Songgong's voice resounded in front of the cave. Chioshan Jun said nothing, no emotion visible on his pale face, but his right hand that hung at his side began to tremble. It was a sign of rage, of uncontrollable rage. Many people noticed this detail and grew more and more nervous. Bai Kai was even sadder to the extreme. He thought to himself, what should I do next? How can I become enemies with eldest brother? Xiao Songgong finished his words. After a moment of silence, Chioshan Jun asked, Marshal uncle, in your opinion, how should this matter be handled? Hearing this, the last unease in the hearts of Xiao Songgong and the others was completely dispelled. The elder of the Discipline Hall said harmoniously, we have already decided that Qi Jian will be handed over to the Discipline Hall for trial, and the sect leader will temporarily abdicate. Since you have woken up, of course you will be the sect leader. The elder, surnamed Jiang from the Longevity sect, added, Zhexiu and Qin Changsheng, who colluded with Qi Jian, should be punished. The Longevity sect and Holy Maiden Peak will jointly write a letter to the Li Palace. The Pope must also give an explanation. Xiao Songgong looked at him and said, Marshal nephew didn't know the specific situation before, so he misunderstood and said those 4 words in the cave. Now you should know what you should do. Countless pairs of eyes fell on Chioshan Jun. People could guess what he would choose. Because the accusations of Xiao Songgong and the others were true, Qi Jian really was the daughter of Su Li and the Demon Princess. In order to prevent the internal strife of Mount Li from continuing to bleed, Qiushan Jun might struggle in pain, but he would assuredly make a swift decision. This was the magnanimity that a person who wished to accomplish great things had to possess. An entire continent knew that even when he was a child, Qiushan Jun's actions were very magnanimous, very majestic. He would assuredly make the choice that most suited Mount Li's interests, most conformed to the righteous path of the human world. Humans and demons could not coexist. Before this, what did the so-called kindness of a teacher, the kindness of teaching skills, count for? The Qiushan clan head calmly gazed at his son, his heart filled with extreme pride. The youngest star condensation cultivator in history, the youngest sect master of the Mount Li sword sect in history, and in a few more years he would be the youngest sect master of the longevity sect in history, and in a few more years he would naturally be the youngest saint in history. In the long river of history, who could be more outstanding than his own son? His pride didn't just come from this. It also came from Qiushan Jun's performance in this matter. He believed that just like Liang Xiaoxiao's death, Qiushan Jun's coma and awakening were also perfect arrangements. Qiushan Jun's coma was very timely, and his awakening was even more timely. When he was unconscious, he had jumped out of the internal strife of Mount Li. When he awoke, the strife had already come to an end. Only he could end this strife. He was the only one, so he was naturally the best candidate. He did not need to bear the infamy of Xiao Songgong and the others charging into the main peak to force an abdication. He only needed to sleep, and he would be able to obtain all the benefits. In a little while, if he could shed a few tears, he could even gain the praise of the world for his loyalty and benevolence. The Qiushan clan head looked at his son and sighed ruefully. As expected of Longer, your father is far inferior to you. There is one problem. Qiushan Jun looked at Xiao Songgong and said, "Previously, you said to Bai Kai, if your sword heart is truly pure, then why do you only dare to rebuke your fellow disciples, but not dare to ask your master if this matter is true or false?" Xiao Songgong did not notice a detail in these words. He casually said, "Correct." Qiushan Jun turned to glance at Bai Kai and asked, "Why don't you dare to ask?" Bai Kai felt a bitter taste in his mouth, thinking, what use is there in asking? Qiushan Jun turned to the sect master and asked, "Master, what martial uncle said, is it true?" Bai Kai was extremely distressed, thinking, "Senior brother, why must you force the sect master into desperate straits? Why must you be so ruthless?" The sect master faintly smiled at Qiushan Jun and prepared to speak. Xiao Songgong suddenly felt that something was wrong and sternly yelled, "You must swear on the ancestors of Mount Li that you cannot lie. Tell Qiushan, is Qi Jian really the son of a demon princess?" The sect master sighed at Qiushan Jun. This matter is true. The meaning of these words was very clear. This matter was true, but everything else was naturally not. Xiao Songgong did not care about these things. As long as the sect master admitted this point, it was fine. He instantly relaxed. The Qiushan clan had looked at the scene in front of the dwelling and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Yes, both the sect master and Qiushan Jun had appeared too calm. "What are you still doing here?" Qiushan Jun calmly said to Bai Kai. Quickly help the sect master into rest. The mountain was quiet. Everyone was rather perplexed, not understanding what this meant. Even Bai Kai stared blankly for a moment before coming to his senses. Following his orders, he helped the sect master into the dwelling. Before entering the dwelling, the sect master said, "Handle it well." Qiushan Jun replied, "Master, be at ease." After saying this, he extended his hand and plucked the sword that belonged to him from the several dozen sword glows in front of the dwelling. It was the sword called Lin. Seeing this scene, everyone finally realized that at some point the sect master had given him to the myriad sword array of Mount Li. Elder Xiao Songgong looked at Qiushan Jun, his expression gradually growing solemn. "You're done asking?" Qiushan Jun replied, "Yes, I'm done asking." Xiao Songgong took a deep breath and said, "And then?" Qiu Jun gazed at the mountains and casually said, "And then, naturally, the Mountly disciples raised their swords to meet the enemy." Xiao Songgong's expression became abnormally ugly. In a cold voice, he yelled, "Just what are you doing? Did you not hear? Your master personally admitted it. Qi Jian's mother was a demon princess." Qiu Jun raised his sword and looked at Xiao Songgong and those powerful enemies. "So what? Today I naturally thought of the Qing emperor, but today I didn't." Chapter 413. These words silenced all the peaks. Qiu Jun looked at the crowd and said, "Just what sort of person is Marshal Granduncle? Let alone having an affair with that demon princess. What does it matter if you marry her in a Mountly?" Xiao Songgong was enraged, thinking, what sort of absurd words are these? Even those Mountly disciples felt that the words of their beloved eldest brother were completely unreasonable. Qiu Jun could naturally sense the mood in front of the dwelling. Marshal Granduncle marrying a demon princess. Would it harm the interests of the human race? If it doesn't affect them in the slightest, what sort of sin is this? In my view, it's the human race that has gained the greatest advantage. Some people in the peaks were indignant and loudly yelled, "Humans and demons cannot coexist. How can they marry each other?" Xiao Songgong's complexion was also ashen. Truly absurd to the extreme. The so-called absurd is just a matter that a normal person would not dare to do, a path that they would not dare to walk. Qiu Jun expressionlessly said to Xiao Songgong, "My Mountly sword sect, from the founding ancestor to Marshal Granduncle, has always dared to do things that no one in the world dares to do. Only then can we achieve merits that no one in the world dares to achieve. If you say it's absurd, then it's absurd." Then he turned to the Mountly disciples and harshly yelled, "Marshal Granduncle dared to kill the demon emperor and dared to marry a demon princess. This is the spirit and boldness of Mountly. As disciples of Mountly, not only do you not feel elated, you are dejected and your sword hearts are unstable. How can you be worthy of the demeanor of my Mountly? Truly disappointing me to the extreme." His words were like a sword, falling from a cliff and stirring up the wind. Borrowing the sound transmission array of the myriad sword array, his words resounded through the peaks and fell into the hearts of all the Mountly disciples. Like a bell, they all woke up. The common people all said that the sword came from Mountly. The sword was sharp. The spirit and boldness of Mountly, the demeanor of Mountly, all lay in the word sharp. Before the cold sword, what sort of rules were there? What sort of reason was there? What sort of absurdity was there to care about? What Mountly spoke of was the righteous path of sword intent. It would not be bound by those rotten frameworks. Bai Kai was extremely excited, thinking to himself, eldest brother truly is eldest brother. Once he wakes up, he causes all a Mountly to wake up once more. Countless disciples thought back to their previous hesitation, even their thoughts of compromise, and couldn't help but feel ashamed, even sweating profusely. The Qiushan clan head gazed at his son, who had used only a few words to make Mountly quiet and somber once more. He gazed at those sword glows flashing across his pale face, and his emotions became extremely complex. His expression gradually grew grave and stern, and then he glanced at the guardian at his side. He didn't know what Qiu Jun was going to do or why, but he had to make some preparations. The mood of Xiao Songgong and the others became heavy. They had no choice but to start preparing for the following negotiations. However, the speed of development exceeded everyone's expectations because Qiu Jun was not prepared to negotiate with them at all. Qiu Jun raised his left hand and lightly pointed at the dozens of sword lights outside the cave. With a light clap, a sword will emerge from his fingertip and pierce the small sword of simple and unadorned style in the sword light. The small sword suddenly left the sword light and flew up into the azure sky above the peak of Mountly. Everyone already knew that the Mountly sect master had long ago secretly passed on the myriad sword array to Qiu Jun. From this perspective, Xiao Songgong and the others had previously accused the sect master of wanting to pass the position of sect master to Qi Jian and not to Qiu Jun. This had already become a joke, but they still had not expected that Qiu Jun could actually control that small, simple sword. The sect master's commanding sword. Xiao Songgong's expression suddenly changed. With a roar, the sword at his waist unsheathed, wanting to stop that small sword from flying off the peak. However, Qiu Jun had long since been prepared. With a wave of his sleeves, several dozen sword glows left the cave and shot straight at Xiao Songgong. These several dozen sword glows were a part of Mount Li's most powerful myriad sword array. Their might was unimaginably dreadful. Xiao Songgong's liver and guts went cold. How could he still care about stopping that small sword? Withdrawing his sword, he rushed to meet it. Clang, 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 clang. A series of extremely concentrated clangs of swords clashing could be heard. Several dozen sword glows flew back to the cave. Several sword gashes appeared on Xiao Songgong's clothes. Blood gradually flowed out, and his complexion was extremely unsightly. Even though he was the most senior elder of Mount Li, his cultivation had long since reached the upper level of star condensation, and back in the palace in the capital, he was only slightly inferior to a legendary demi-human general like Jin Yulu. He was still no match for Mount Li's myriad sword array. If not for the fact that the majority of the myriad sword array's power had been used in the sword array in the belly of the mountain in preparation for sending the elites of the Mount Li sword sect to the north to rescue Su Li, leaving only these several dozen sword glows, Xiao Songgong would probably have already lost his life on the spot. That small sword had already flown high into the sky. A few of the Mount Li disciples with good eyesight could even more clearly see that at the final moment, that small sword had actually split into three and flown to three different places. The Discipline Hall elder, surnamed Hong, angrily yelled, "Qiu Shan, you actually dare to attack an elder? Truly disgraceful and heinous." Qiu Jun stared at him and yelled, "Hong Zhizhou, you actually dare to bring outsiders into the main peak and plot against the sect master. Truly disgraceful and heinous." His words were still like a sword, firm and upright, bright and clear. Although his cultivation was far inferior to these Mount Li elders, whether it was in words or in battle, he was not the slightest bit disadvantaged, and his momentum was even more imposing. The Discipline Hall elder choked, not knowing how to respond. Qiu Jun took a step forward and shouted in a clear voice. Xiao Songgong and the other two trespassed into the main peak, plotted against the sect master, colluded with outsiders, and committed treason. Under the orders of the sect master, I hold the myriad sword array and temporarily hold the authority of sect master. According to the rules of Mount Li, I expel these three people from Mount Li and send a letter to Holy Maiden Peak, the Longevity Sect, and the Li Palace, announcing today's matter to the world. Hearing these words, everyone was shocked, speechless. How could they have imagined that Qiu Jun would act so decisively and coldly, not giving them the slightest chance to negotiate and directly expelling the three elders from Mount Li? The commanding sword of the Mount Li sect master was already flying towards the three holy lands. This matter could no longer be changed, and it was the same as cutting off all possibilities of compromise. The Qiu clan elder's complexion became abnormally unsightly. Even now, he still did not know what his son was preparing to do, but Qiu Jun had already mentioned the word outsiders twice, and the meaning was already clear. Whether it was the nominal ancestral or the longevity sect, or the true birthplace of the Qiu clan, on Mount Li, they were all outsiders, and so they could also be enemies. Qiu Jun surveyed the mountains and asked, "Where are the disciples of Mount Li? Follow me and expel these traitors and enemies from Mount Li." This was still a sword, an extremely penetrating sword. Qiu Jun did not need his fellow disciples to think. He only needed them to make a decision. And this also happened to coincide with the sword hearts of the disciples of Mount Li. So how could his fellow disciples not respond? Even those hundred-some disciples that had followed Xiao Songgong and the other two elders to charge through the mountain couldn't help but reveal an expression of hesitation, even shame. Where were the disciples of Mount Li? Between the various peaks, a response resounded. This was the sound of swords. Countless swords left their sheaths, their sword chi flourishing, soaring into the sky. These 2 days, I have some private matters to take care of. My wife only left Hubei for a few days, and now she's flying back. She'll probably be busy for 2 or 3 days. If there's no update tomorrow, I'll report it to everyone. Chapter 414. Seeing the sword glows soaring into the sky from all the peaks of Mount Li, Xiao Songgong's expression greatly changed. The 2 discipline hall elders had grim expressions, and that old elder, surnamed Jiang from the longevity sect, had an extremely unsightly expression. Only the Qiushan clan head continued to stare at Qiushan Jun without saying a word. Qiushan Jun did not even glance at his father. He said to Xiao Songgong and the others, "Still not giving up without a fight? Are you really prepared to endure the punishment of 10,000 swords piercing through your heart?" Then he turned to those Mount Li disciples that had followed Xiao Songgong and the others to charge onto the main peak. He coldly said, "As for you lot, to let bygones be bygones, that is absolutely impossible. But seeing that today only blood has been spilled and no death have occurred, if you lot abandon your swords, I will punish you according to the rules of the sect and not expel you from the sect." Those Mount Li disciples that had followed their masters to charge onto the main peak were already anxious. When Qiushan Jun appeared and even unyieldingly stood on the sect master's side, they were already beginning to show signs of hesitation. Now that they heard these words, they began to struggle even more fiercely. Xiao Songgong laughed from extreme anger. Gripping his long sword, he looked at Qiushan Jun and said, "Truly absurd to the extreme. Even if everyone in the world knows that in the future, the Mount Li sword sect will inevitably fall under your control, you're not even 20 years old right now. As a third-generation disciple, you actually dare to disrespect us elders, actually dare to attack me. In these past few years, my Mount Li sword sect has truly been led down the evil path by Su Li." Qiushan Jun looked at him and seriously said, "Evil people do not walk the righteous path, so how can a righteous person walk the evil path?" Xiao Songgong was even more enraged. He harshly yelled, "Previously, your master used the sword array to seal off the paths between the peaks precisely because he didn't want the disciples of the peaks to die under our swords. If you dare to use the myriad sword array to attack us, how many people from the peaks of Mount Li will die today? Do you really want my Mount Li sword sect to be destroyed by internal strife?" Hearing these words, the sword glows between the peaks slightly froze. Bai Kai and the other Mount Li disciples turned to Qiushan Jun, their gazes filled with unease, because they clearly understood that what Xiao Songgong said was correct. The Mount Li sword sect's most powerful sword hall elites were currently completely trapped in the sword array in the belly of the mountain. Although the Mount Li disciples supporting the sect master and Qiushan Jun were numerous, in terms of battle prowess, they were far inferior to Xiao Songgong and the other 2 second-generation elders with deep cultivations. This was not even considering the fact that the longevity sect elder had accompanied them to Mount Li today, as well as the Qiushan clan head and that Qiushan clan guardian of unfathomable cultivation. It must be known that the vast majority of the myriad sword array's power was used to lay down the teleportation sword array. Even if Qiushan Jun and the third-generation disciples of Mount Li were determined to live and die with Mount Li, they still might not be able to repel such a powerful enemy. If the 2 sides truly disregarded everything and began a fight, then even if Qiushan Jun could completely release the remaining power of the myriad sword array, Mount Li would probably flow with rivers of blood. Who knew how many of those disciples loyal to Mount Li would perish on the spot? And was it really worth it? Qiushan Jun gazed at the clouds and sword glows between the peaks, his sword-like eyebrows slightly raised. Everyone knew that he had already made his preparations to attack. In the next moment, he would attack. He had already expelled the 2 discipline hall elders from Mount Li, so the Mount Li relic sword was currently in his chest. With the Mount Li relic sword in front of him, there was no such thing as whether it was worth it or not, only whether it should be or not. Bai Kai understood. Without another word, he raised his sword and walked behind eldest brother, calmly and resolutely gazing at those powerful enemies. The several dozen Mountly disciples also understood. They walked to the stone steps and prepared for the arrival of this final battle. They did not care if they had been injured before, did not care if their shoulders were still dripping blood. Their hands, gripping their swords, were incomparably steady. Xiao Song Gong and the others also understood, as did the disciples behind them. Some disciples lowered their heads, some cursed, some silently walked to the edge of the stage, and some slowly lowered the swords in their hands. Just at this moment, a voice slowly rose up from the summit. When you were 4 years old, you encountered a dragon in the South Spirit Mountain. All of your servants died, and you were the only one alive. You didn't attack the unicorn, but allowed it to bring you back to its cave to be used as food in the future. To this day, including your father, no one knows how you managed to survive or how you managed to kill that flood dragon. However, I believe that what you relied on at that time was absolutely not willpower or courage, but intelligence. The speaker was the Qiushan clan head. He impassively looked at Qiushan Jun and said, I did not expect that the current you would actually be taught by your master, and Su Li into a person who believes in the bravery of a common man. This truly makes me very disappointed, and I even somewhat regret sending you to Mountly back then. Qiushan Jun said nothing, only calmly gazed at him. The Qiushan clan head shook his head. Your awakening should have been an extremely good thing, whether it was for you or for the entire Mountly Sword sect, because only you could prevent the destruction of Mountly. But in the end, what did you do? If you were thinking about the kindness between master and disciple, I can clearly tell you that neither the Longevity sect, the Qiushan clan, nor even the Divine Empress has any intention of letting your master die. We only believe that because of Su Li and Qi Jian, he is no longer suitable to hold the position of sect master of the Mountly Sword sect. However, there is assuredly a place for him in the Longevity sect's Council of Elders. Mountly only needs to clearly recognize Su Li's crimes, and then it can welcome a brand new and beautiful future. Why not? The Qiushan clan head's voice gradually became unyielding and cold. I am your father, and the entire continent is well aware that everything I do is for your sake. Do you not understand? No matter how much of a genius you are, succeeding in star condensation before the age of 20, today's matter has far-reaching implications. How could you possibly resolve it? Qiushan Jun calmly gazed at him, then suddenly asked, Father, just what do you want to do for me? The Qiushan clan head replied, We want to completely remove Su Li and his shadow from Mountly. Qiushan Jun asked, Why must you do this? The Qiushan clan head expressionlessly replied, Only by doing this can we ensure that Mountly will be clean when it reaches your hands. After a moment of silence, Qiushan Jun replied, Father, you know that I am not this sort of person. The Qiushan clan head replied, Yes, if you are not willing, let alone Mountly, you don't even want the world. But you must be clear about one thing. Su Li will inevitably die in Xuanyang City. If you want Mountly to remain as powerful as it was in the past, you should bring out a true resolution and face this reality squarely. Qiushan Jun calmly replied, So I should hand over Junior Brother, ask the sect master to abdicate, and myself succeed. Only in this way can I avoid internal strife in Mountly, preserve my strength, and scheme for the future and all ages? The Qiushan clan head harshly asked, Is this not right? If it is necessary to ignore reality in order to face reality squarely, then it is better to ignore this kind of reality, because in the following days, no one will be able to ignore every decision they make. They will definitely feel regret in their hearts. Qiushan Jun looked at his father and the 4 elders and said, You are already old and can live a little more realistically, but we are still young. If we survive, there will inevitably be endless years waiting for us. I do not want to think of today and the years to come and feel regret and pain, so I will not act according to your methods. You're already old, we are still young. Their minds could not be linked, so their methods were naturally different. Hearing eldest brother's calm and firm voice, many Mountly disciples suddenly felt like a clear spring had descended from the heavens. Their eyes became slightly moist, but their sword hearts were washed clear and bright. The Qiushan clan head looked at his son his emotions abnormally complex, complex to an unimaginable degree. He was proud, but also sad, proud, but also angry. For the sake of today's chaos in Mount Lee, Jun, the longevity sect, and many other experts of the South had planned for such a long time. How could they allow it to fail? Because of a young man. Yes, Jun was the son he was most proud of, the future of the Choshan clan. But it must be known that this was not the matter of Jun alone. This was the matter of the Choshan clan for 1,000 years. Ultimately, he made his decision. He looked at Jun and expressionlessly said, "Heaven and earth." These were two very common words, but with the appearance of these two words, the mountains suddenly fell silent. Even those sword glows dimmed somewhat, because everyone had already guessed at which scripture the Choshan clan head had spoken of heaven and earth came from. It was the opening verse of an extremely famous scripture in the Taoist scriptures of the Orthodoxy. Heaven and earth, and then Father and Son. This was the supreme principle of nature, the ethics of the human world. No one could resist it. It's too tiring, all kinds of discomfort. It's good that I can write it, and the quality is also pretty good. Chapter 4:15. Everyone stared at Jun, waiting for his reply. Answer Father and Son, or remain silent. If he remained silent, then he would become a rebellious and unfilial son. Bai Kai's face was completely red. He knew how much pain eldest brother was in at this moment. Xiao Songgong indifferently said to Jun, "Could it be that you really dare to attack your own father?" The eyes of the longevity sect elder revealed a mocking and pitying expression. Yes, even if Jun had calculated every possibility, was decisive in killing, held the myriad sword array in his hand, and dared to burn precious jade, could he still dare to kill his own father? Jun was very quiet, gazing at the distant mountains. After a very long time, he finally withdrew his gaze and turned to his father, giving him a proper bow. Then he said two words, Father and Son. A gentle wind blew through the mountains, like a helpless sigh. Cutting off one's robe could sever friendship. Cutting off one's mat could sever friendship. But even if one truly cut off all the flesh on one's body, it would still be impossible to sever one of the most powerful relationships in the world, bloodline. Jun was perfect, possessing great wisdom and courage, a man of great benevolence. How could he commit such an unfilial act? How could he attack his own father? The Choshan clan head gazed at Jun, his emotions somewhat complex. Everyone says that you have the bloodline of a true dragon rarely seen in 1,000 years. But who remembers that the blood flowing in your body is the blood of my Choshan clan? Fortunately, you haven't forgotten. Jun said nothing, calmly gazing at him. For some reason, his eyes made one's heart palpitate. The Choshan clan head had an extremely bad feeling. Not wanting any further changes, he hurriedly said, "Since you don't want to become a rebellious person, then quickly remove the myriad sword array." Jun was quiet for a time, then said, "Father, you might have misunderstood my meaning." The crowd was rather astonished, thinking the Choshan clan head spoke of heaven and earth, and you responded to Father and Son. This means that you know that you can't contend against the word morals. Is there any other way? Jun looked at the Choshan clan head and asked, "A benevolent father and a filial son. I must respect my father, but father, shouldn't you love your son?" The Choshan clan head's complexion was somewhat unsightly as he shouted, "Where did this nonsense come from?" Everyone knew that although Jun spent many years studying the sword at Mount Lee, the Choshan clan head regarded him as a precious treasure. No matter what request Jun had, the Choshan clan head would completely comply. Even the Choshan clan had taken great care of the disciples of Mount Lee over the years. In terms of love and protection, the Choshan clan head could be said to be a perfect father. Jun looked at his father and continued, "Yes, in these past few years, Father has helped me deal with many matters, helped me arrange many paths, whether it was sending me to Mount Lee back then, or having me and Marshall Granduncle accidentally meet in the mountain stream. If everything had developed according to Father's plans, then in the future, The Mountly Sword sect would inevitably be mine, and perhaps the Longevity sect would also be mine, and then I would become the youngest saint. If I could marry Junior's sister Sue, then we would probably become the new generation of the White Emperor couple, and after the confluence of the North and South, perhaps would also be ours. For this reason, you took advantage of the time when I was fighting over the key to the Garden of Zhou to persuade the elders of the South to go to the capital and propose marriage. You clearly knew that Junior's sister Sue was not ready to marry me. And even more excessive was that you used some unknown method to persuade the Holy Maiden to transfer Junior's sister Sue away from South Stream Temple. Yes, Father's already done many things for me, so how could this not be love? After hearing this long speech, the summit of Mount Li fell silent once more. Qiushan Jun's words were very unyielding, very direct, very bright, but what he said was the complete opposite. The Qiushan clan head's complexion became even more unsightly. Just what do you want to say? Qiushan Jun replied. What I want to say is, Father, the more you love me and the more you pay for me, the less likely it is for you to succeed today. On the contrary, I want to thank Father for coming to Mount Li today and assisting me in quelling this rebellion, because from now on, perhaps Father should act according to my plans. The Qiushan clan head was so angry that his entire body trembled. He yelled, Unfilial son, don't tell me you really dare to attack me. Your son does not dare. Qiushan Jun calmly replied, then unsheathed the inverse scale sword from its sheath. A bright sword glow illuminated the summit, as if a true dragon had peeked its head out of the clouds, sprinkling down a sheet of light. The Qiushan clan head suddenly guessed at something. His expression abruptly changed as he shouted in a trembling voice, Quickly stop him! Take his sword! Hearing this shout, the expression of the Qiushan clan guardian suddenly turned cold, and the qi he exuded suddenly rose to an extremely terrifying level. At this moment, everyone finally confirmed that this guardian of unfathomable cultivation was truly incomparably powerful. As long as he was given time, he really might be able to break through the remnants of the myriad sword array. Bai Kai and the other Mount Li disciples did not know what their eldest brother intended to do next. Upon hearing the Qiushan clan head's words, they subconsciously gripped their swords and moved forward, spreading out in front of the dwelling. Sword glows were everywhere. The Mount Li disciples laid down a sword array, protecting Qiushan Jun behind them. The Qiushan clan guardian was unable to stop Qiushan Jun. It was not because the Mount Li disciples had hastily laid down a sword array, nor was it because the myriad sword array in front of the dwelling was still in operation. It was only because Qiushan Jun was too fast. Before Qiushan Jun attacked, it seemed like he had not gone through any sort of thought, no consideration of benefit, no cry of the sword heart. It was like seeing a child playing at the edge of a well and almost falling in, so he would naturally extend his hand to grab it. This sort of attack did not give off the impression of being too fast, but it was very decisive, very natural. How could anyone possibly stop it? There was a soft squelch. The inverse scale sword had pierced through his chest and then emerged. The blade of the sword was smeared with dark red blood. It was no longer as bright as before, but it was especially bright, like a newly sprouted wildflower. The summit of Mount Li was deathly still. Everyone was stupefied. There was no sound at all, only the gentle caress of the mountain wind. Only now did the crowd understand the voice of the mountain wind. It was not a helpless sigh, but an endless exclamation of praise. Bai Kai yelled and rushed back to Qiushan Jun's side, supporting him as he tottered about to fall. Qiushan Jun's face was pale, but his expression was still calm. Blood had soaked half his body, and his sword was in it. His sword was very fast, very steady, and very accurate. It had pierced through his body, but it had not pierced his heart. His sword only needed to move a tiny bit more, and he would die. The Qiushan clan head also finally understood. His face grew even paler than Qiushan Jun's. For Qiushan Jun, the Qiushan clan had paid too much, done too much, prepared for too long. If this was an investment, failure was not permitted, but if Qiushan Jun died, everything would be for naught. If this was not an investment, but love, how could he bear to see his own son die? Heaven and earth, and then father and son. This was the supreme principle of nature, the ethics of a human world. No one could resist it. Yes, it was like this. But just because Qiu Jun had said the words father and son did not mean that he would be trapped by blood and affection. On the contrary, he wanted to use this to counterattack his father. Since the Qiu clan head could use his status as a father to ask him to give up something, then he could naturally use his son's life to ask him to give up something. The father was benevolent, the son was filial. The son was like his father. This was how it was. Panting. Chapter 416. The sunlight shone on the main peak of Mount Li, piercing through those rainbow-like sword glows and falling on Qiu Jun's body. It illuminated his pale face, calm eyes, and blood-soaked body. Bright and beautiful, yet bloody, it was hair-raising. From beginning to end, no one spoke. The mountain was deathly still. At this moment, the only people with the right to speak were the father and son of the Qiu clan. "Father, let's go home. We will resolve the matter of Mount Li ourselves." Qiu Jun looked at his father and said. His voice was very steady, without the slightest tremble, but everyone could hear the pain in it. In order to save the human cultivators in the Garden of Zhou, he had slept for several dozen days before waking up. His injuries were far from completely healed, and now that he had been pierced through the chest by a sword, he was no longer able to support himself. If not for Bai Kai's support, he probably would have collapsed long ago. The Qiu clan head's gaze moved from the sword piercing through his chest to his face. The disappointment in his eyes grew stronger and stronger until it reached the extreme point of indifference, the extreme apathy. He looked at Qiu Jun and said, "How much did the Qiu clan pay for you to allow you to obtain your current reputation? Yet in the end, you use your life to threaten the clan, even if the clan has to pay an incomparably painful price?" Qiu Jun said nothing. The Qiu clan head's body slightly swayed. In the end, indifference was only a facade. How could he not be angry? How could my Qiu clan produce a thing like you, unfilial son? After saying this, he turned around and walked away, no longer looking at his son. At the same time, he shouted out 2 words. "Do it!" Hearing these 2 words, the people on the summit immediately became nervous. Everyone knew that these 2 words were directed at the Qiu clan guardian. Qiu Jun was already heavily injured and on the verge of death, but the Qiu clan head was still not willing to give up. The expressions of the 2 discipline hall elders subtly changed. They wanted to say something, but in the end, they did not speak. Xiao Songgong and the longevity sect's elder Jiang, on the other hand, appeared much more relaxed. Although Qiu Jun's choice had exceeded their expectations, as long as the Qiu clan still firmly stood on their side, at least the present situation was still under their control. That Qiu clan guardian with unfathomable strength had previously raised his cultivation to its peak in order to stop Qiu Jun from drawing his sword. Now, upon hearing the Qiu clan head's order, he simply did not need to adjust his breathing. Just as the words Qiu clan took the initiative were still echoing in everyone's ears, the Qiu clan's guardian had already made his move. His first move was the Autumn Mountain Seal. In the south, there was Autumn Mountain, which fell on the plains like a great seal. Autumn Mountain Seal was a type of palm technique, and when it was executed, it was able to attack dozens of enemies at the same time. If this palm technique was cultivated to the extreme, it would be like a mountain descending from the heavens, unceasingly crashing into the plains, and its might was incomparably enormous. This Qiu clan guardian was the only Qiu clan expert in the last 100 years who had cultivated the Qiu seal to its peak. The mountain winds howled as the Autumn Mountain Seal broke through the clouds and descended, arriving in front of the dwelling on the main peak of Mount Li. There was a loud bang. The palm of the Qiu clan's guardian heavily struck the backs of the 2 discipline hall elders. The 2 discipline hall elders were completely unprepared. They felt as if their backs had been hit by a huge mountain. Blood gushed out from their mouths, drenching their short white beards and clothes. At this time, the Chioshan clan head was just turning around. His right sleeve very casually rose, as if he wanted to sweep away the depression in his heart and the anger brought about by Chioshan Jun's disobedience. No one noticed that his palm had extended out from the shadow of his sleeve. There was a light clap. The Chioshan clan head's sleeve rose up, and his palm noiselessly extended out, lightly landing on Xiao Songgong's left shoulder. Xiao Songgong let out a furious and shocked howl, raising his sword to block. However, there was no time to block his sword. That powerful and extremely pure, true essence directly shattered his shoulder. Then, like a flood, it rushed into his sea of consciousness. Only in the moment before he fainted did he realize that the Chioshan clan head had actually attacked him. And this rumored extremely ordinary man whose brilliance had been completely overshadowed by Chioshan Jun actually possessed such terrifying strength. The mountain winds were torn to shreds by the violent clash of chi, howling without end. The two disciplined hall elders sat cross-legged on the ground, constantly vomiting blood. Only by relying on their profound strength did they barely manage to survive. Xiao Songgong was even more miserable. His shoulder was already a bloody pulp, and he had fallen into the arms of a disciple. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The sound of the wind gradually died down, leaving the scene in a deathly stillness. No one could understand what had happened. No one could understand why the Chioshan clan head and that guardian would suddenly attack three Mountly elders. The situation had changed too quickly, so quickly that everyone was caught unprepared. They were stunned speechless. The Chioshan clan head took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped away the blood of Xiao Songgong on his hand. His expression was very calm. The longevity sect's elder Jiang stared at him and asked in a trembling voice, "You have gone mad?" The Chioshan clan head looked at him and said, "Elder, why don't you follow me down the mountain?" Elder Jiang had no idea what was going on. He was furious and confused, and upon hearing these words, he was prepared to harshly continue questioning when he suddenly came to his senses. No matter what the Chioshan clan head wanted to do, the three Mountly elders had already fallen to their sneak attack. If he wanted to do anything, perhaps he would be attacked in the next moment. Just like many of the experts of the South, Elder Zhang's impression of the Chioshan clan head was very ordinary. In private, he would even occasionally ridicule him. He thought to himself, if not for Chioshan Jun, who would care about such an incompetent person? But now he understood. There was no way this person was an incompetent person. Although he still did not understand why the Chioshan clan would suddenly rise in revolt, he could at least clearly see just how powerful the Chioshan clan head was. It must be known that even if it was a sneak attack, to be able to so casually cripple Elder Xiao Songgong with a single palm, there are not many people on the continent that possess this kind of strength. Moreover, the Chioshan clan head had a guardian with an equally unfathomable cultivation at his side. Elder Jiang understood these matters. Without another word, he walked down the mountain path. In the space of a few breaths, he had disappeared from the winding mountain path of Mount Li, walking without the slightest hesitation. The peak was currently in chaos. Those Mount Li disciples that had followed Xiao Songgong's three elders into the main peak were furious that their teacher had been heavily injured in a sneak attack, but even more of them were perplexed and helpless. "We should also go." The Chioshan clan head did not pay any attention to those Mount Li disciples that were glaring at him in grief and indignation, and calmly said. The Chioshan clan guardian walked to his side, took the blood-stained handkerchief he handed over, stuffed it into his sleeve, and then walked down the mountain together. In this entire process, the Chioshan clan head did not turn around to glance at Chioshan Jun, not even when he was leaving. A cool breeze lingered, and his figure had already disappeared. On the stone plateau of Mount Li's main peak, only a few bloodstains remained. Chioshan Jun gazed in the direction of the mountain path in silence. With regards to the Chioshan clan, ever since he was very young, there were some things that he could not understand. That old guardian was actually his third granduncle. The great clans and clans had always respected strength. He had never understood why his third granduncle, who had cultivated to the peak of star condensation, had not become the Chioshan clan head. On the contrary, it was his father, who was very ordinary in every aspect, who had become the Chioshan clan head. He had originally believed that this had something to do with his true dragon bloodline, but just now, when he saw his father move, when he saw his third granduncle respectfully and silently take that blood-stained handkerchief from his father's hands, he finally truly understood. Only, he still could not understand why his father had done this in the end. An extremely luxurious carriage traveled from the base of Mount Li to Chioshan. The carriage was pulled by dragon-blooded horses. The carriage was accompanied by flood dragon blood wine, and the floor was paved with a carpet woven from demon rabbits. The people sitting in the carriage were naturally the Chioshan clan head and that guardian. Now it seems that the scheme to seize the Mount Li sword sect was still a little too hasty. The losses this time will be rather large. The Chioshan clan head looked through the carriage window at the faintly discernible Mount Li in the clouds. It was as if the person who had launched a sneak attack on Xiao Songgong was not him, nor was the person who had caused this matter to end without any cause. The guardian smiled. I wonder what Elder Jiang will say when he returns to the longevity sect. The Chioshan clan head revealed a mocking smile. 10 some years ago, after Sir Su's massacre, the longevity sect was already crippled. No matter what he says, would the longevity sect still dare to declare war against my Chioshan? The guardian's expression turned grave. But the Empress, how will we explain this to her side? The Chioshan clan head's eyebrows perked up. The Empress is benevolent. She can't possibly force me to kill my own son. Yes, that's my son. I'm not as formidable as the Empress. He was not willing to think about this matter. He sighed. After the Garden of Zhou, my son has once again improved. He can actually think of such a ruthless method. To use one's own life to threaten one's own father, no matter how one looked at it. This matter was very ruthless. Just like how the Chioshan clan head had at the very beginning prepared to use the position of father and son to pressure Chioshan Jun, it was also very ruthless. It was just that the son was even more ruthless than the father. He's even more ruthless than me, so I can't force him to help me. So I naturally have no choice but to help him. I just don't know when Chioshan will be able to understand this point. There's no need to understand, just do it. Just like how ruthless he is, this is a necessary temperament for those who accomplish great things, even though this inevitably reveals a rather unpleasant fact to me. What fact? I love him more than he loves me. After saying this, the Chioshan clan head fell silent. Then he smiled and shook his head. But isn't it always like this between father and son? Chapter 417. In truth, there are times when even I don't understand why I could give birth to such an outstanding child as Chioshan. The Chioshan clan head gazed out the window at that lingering Mount Li and said, just like how the entire continent doesn't understand how that idiotic fool Su Shiji could actually give birth to Su Yurong. After saying this, he paused, then added in more serious tone, of course, Su Shiji is inferior to me. The Chioshan clan guardian knew what he was talking about. He smiled and nodded his head. He is far inferior to clan head. The Chioshan clan head's eyebrows flew up. How was he like the decisive hero who had just killed on the main peak? Instead, he was a simple and proud father. Ever since my son's bloodline awakened, I've always been cultivating and studying with all my might. There is nothing I haven't learned, all because I wanted to catch up to his footsteps and not be a burden to him. Now it seems that I have barely managed to do it. The Chioshan clan guardian's smile was very sincere, even filled with admiration. The Chioshan clan head had originally been the most famous hedonistic son of the South, so just like how Chioshan Jun had never understood since he was a child, when the Chioshan clan ancestor decided to hand over the entire clan to the current Chioshan clan head, he also could not understand. It must be known that at the time, he was already an upper-level star condensation expert of the South, and in terms of seniority, he was the ancestor's uncle. No matter how one looked at it, he should have been the one in charge of the Chioshan clan. Later on, when Chioshan Jun was born and his true dragon bloodline awakened, he believed that this was where the ancestor's decision had come from, so he was no longer indignant. He still looked down on the clan head, thinking that this person was just a piece of trash that only knew how to succeed. But now he no longer thought this way, because no one could have expected that after Qiushan Jun's bloodline awakened, the Qiushan clan head would suddenly become a different person. From then on, he would no longer womanize outside, break willows and whip horses, and instead began to diligently study and cultivate. The Qiushan clan head was now a middle-aged man. For a middle-aged man who had wasted half his life to suddenly begin to work hard, one didn't need to ask to know what sort of willpower and determination it required, what sort of price it required. But he had actually done it. In these 10-some years, Qiushan Jun had gone from babbling to learning how to speak to the radiant sword of Mount Li, and had also silently cultivated from the initial level of ethereal opening to the upper level of star condensation. Although it seemed inferior, it was actually much more difficult. What was the reason that allowed him to do such an incredible thing? Just like he said, he didn't have Qiushan Jun's bloodline talent, so he couldn't keep up with his son's footsteps. But he hoped that he could be as strong as possible. At least he wouldn't be a burden to his son. I hope that Qiushan can understand your painstaking efforts as soon as possible, the consecrator said sincerely as he looked at Qiushan by the window. The Qiushan clan head calmly replied, "Even if he never finds out, so what?" The consecrator said, "But today's matter will still have an impact." Qiushan gazed out the window at the famed mountains of the south. After a very long period of silence, he finally said, "Correct. Today's trip to Mount Li truly did run into many problems because I didn't think that Qiushan was actually this sort of child." The consecrator was also silent for a while before asking, "Patriarch, what did you think at first?" This truly was a matter that he, and even all the trusted aides of the Qiushan clan, were curious about. This was because in the past few years, the Qiushan clan had secretly done many things for Qiushan Jun, and it seemed as if Qiushan Jun himself was unaware of these things. I originally believed that since he was my son, he would definitely be a person very similar to me. From another perspective, I originally believed that it was impossible for there to be a person as perfect as my son in this world. So his perfection was definitely fake. A mysterious smile appeared on the Qiushan clan head's face. "So, I thought my son was a hypocrite. So, I secretly did many things. It wouldn't be too much to say that I wouldn't commit any crime. It was all for the sake of laying a good foundation for him, matching his reputation in the world. I was just waiting for the day when he finally appeared in front of tens of thousands of people and revealed his true ambitions." Like that marriage proposal in the capital? Correct. I thought that since he wanted to marry Su Yurong, he also didn't want to bear the infamy of coercion. So he deliberately calculated the time and fought with the demons over the key to the Garden of Zhou. I was his father, so of course I had to help him settle this matter. The Qiushan clan head continued. "Another example is this time. I thought that he was pretending to be injured so that he could stay out of this matter, and at the same time give my Qiushan clan an opportunity to rise and revolt. His plan could be said to be perfect, but who would have thought that I was wrong? I thought that my son was a hypocrite. I didn't think that he was actually a true hero." He looked out the window at Mount Li and smiled. But what father doesn't wish for their son to be a true hero? It's just that heroes die easily. So I, as his father, could only continue to commit any crime, continue to play the role of a hypocrite, in order to ensure that this hero of mine could live. In the future, when the entire world knows of my evil deeds, and he needs to place righteousness before family, I will die at his hands. You see, this is such a perfect story. After hearing these words, the guardian's heart was filled with endless sorrow. He thought to himself, the clan head truly is the world's most extraordinary father. His love for Qiushan Jun is so selfless and selfish, so intense that it makes people feel somewhat fearful. Anyone who blocks Qiushan Jun's path to the most resplendent river of stars will be eliminated by the clan head. And everyone knew that on this continent, the only youth that could barely be mentioned in the same breath as Qiushan Jun was called Chun Changsheng. The guardian began to sympathize with Chun Changsheng's miserable future. Of course, the prerequisite was that the young principal of the Orthodox Academy could leave Xianyang City alive. If the storms of the 8 directions move, Su Li will undoubtedly die, but Qin Changsheng will definitely live. The Qiushan clan head calmly said, that youth's background is too deep, his origins somewhat mysterious. Not even Holy Maiden Peak has been able to completely investigate it. The Divine Empress still hasn't spoken. Zhou Tong still hasn't moved, so I naturally won't be the first to move. Mount Li was an extraordinary place. Liang Xiaoxiao had used his own death to kill people, while his eldest brother Qiushan Jun had used his own life to save people. This sort of person would not die so easily. Qin Changsheng was the same, because he had always been saving people. The rain in Xuanyang City was cold. Perhaps because of this, his face was rather pale. His drenched clothes were riddled with sword holes, but not much blood could be seen, because it had been washed away by the rain. Lu Qing had an ordinary and unremarkable face, an ordinary and unremarkable sword, and the sword techniques he used seemed ordinary and unremarkable, yet he possessed an unimaginable upper-level star condensation cultivation. This was the world's third-ranked assassin. Every strike of his was as cold as ice. Even though Qin Changsheng had been bathed in dragon blood, he still could not block that cold sword. In a very short amount of time, he used the Yesher step to display the final move of the Mount Li sword style, continuously blocking 6 of Lu Qing's strikes. At the same time, 6 bloody holes appeared on his body. The sword did not stab deeply, but it was very painful. Fortunately, the blood that flowed out had no taste, just as tasteless as this battle. No matter how strange Lu Qing's movement technique was, his sword could not stab Su Li, only Qin Changsheng's body. Because Qin Changsheng's sword was very decisive, very ruthless, so it was very fast. Just like the sword that Qiushan Jun had stabbed into his chest at the peak of Mount Li. He looked at Lu Qing, his face pale and expression serious. Emphasizing each word, he said, I will not let you pass. Chapter 4:18. As expected of the third-ranked assassin in the world, Lu Qing's movement technique was abnormally strange. Just as Qin Changsheng said those words, he transformed into a wisp of smoke and disappeared into the heavy curtain of rain. When he reappeared, he was already extremely close to the buckskin horse that was silently lowering its head in the rain, yet his sword still pierced into Qin Changsheng's body once more. Su Li had taught Qin Changsheng 3 swords, and he had used them all at this moment. He was becoming more and more proficient with them, and that ruthless intent of sharing life and death with him was becoming more and more unyielding. He had even begun to enter a realm where he could use them as he pleased. No one knew how many times Qin Changsheng's true essence could support him in using the last move of the Mount Li sword style, but in short, he had persisted until now. Blood shot out from Qin Changsheng's ribs and was quickly washed away by the torrential rain. His face was pale and his expression somewhat wooden, as if he could no longer feel pain. However, his spiritual sense was still rapidly circulating, calculating the next move of this terrifying assassin. At the same time, he also had to pay attention to the battle between Wang Pe and Zhu Luo on the other side of the street. This was the requirement of the intellectual sword. The weather, the terrain, the environment, everything could be calculated. Qin Changsheng looked at the assassin's ordinary and unremarkable appearance and always felt that there was a problem with his calculations. He did not understand why his blood had suddenly become tasteless, and he certainly did not understand why his opponent's sword was not as terrifying as he had imagined. A body that had been soaked in dragon blood was far stronger than a body that had undergone perfect purification. For Lu Qing's sword to be able to so easily break through his defense was already extremely powerful, but according to Qin Changsheng's calculations, Lu Qing's sword should have been even more terrifying. He had already endured 7 swords, yet he was still standing in the rain and had not fallen. Why was this? 7 swords were only for an instant. Even the rainwater only had time to accumulate a little at the base of the broken wall. Whether it was the spectators in the distance or the people hidden in other parts of Xuanyang City, none of them had time to react. The torrential rain washed the long street. In the gloom, only the figures of 5 people and 1 horse could be seen. Wang Pa stood in the rain, his metal blade chopping out countless cracks in space to resist the boundless light that spilled over from the other end of the rain. The edges of the cracks had already become extremely bright, illuminating his body. These lights were all Zhu Luo's sword lights. They looked gentle like the moonlight, but there was nowhere for them to hide. Every sword light that landed on Wang Po's body would leave a straight cut, and fresh blood would flow out. He had already become a man of blood, and no matter how heavy the rain was, it could not wash it away. There was no other sound in the alley except for the sound of the rain. The torrential rain was thunderous. It was very lively, but the people in the field felt that it was a deathly stillness. Liang Wang's son, Liang Hongzhuang, and those people who wanted to kill Su Li at any cost, silently waited for the moment Chen Chongqing fell. Xue He and Hua Jiefu, who represented the two great powers of the Great Zhou imperial court and the orthodoxy, also maintained their silence. The many priests and soldiers hidden within and outside Xuanyang City also maintained their silence. Because of Wang Po's silence and persistence, because of Chen Chongqing's resolve, everyone knew that it was the saints who wanted Su Li dead. Even Zhu Luo was only carrying out the will of the saints. Wang Pa and Chen Chongqing could be considered the strongest experts of their respective ages, but compared to the saints, they were still mortals. Their current opponents were all experts whose strength far surpassed theirs, but they had relied on their willpower and indescribable power to persist until now. Seeing these two figures in the rain, who could not be moved, Wang Po was an important figure of scholarly manner, and Chen Chongqing was the successor to the orthodoxy. They had no friendship with Mount Li, and they should have even been opponents, but for the sake of Su Li's survival, they had fought with the will of the saints until now. Why did they do this? Wang Pa and Chen Chongqing did not like Su Li's personality. In normal times, they probably would not have risked their lives for Su Li, but now was not the time. Su Li should not have been heavily injured for the sake of the human world and the demons, only to be killed by the human world. This was betrayal, a very shameless action. In this matter, Wang Pa and Chen Chongqing firmly believed that they were right and the saints were wrong. Then, in this matter, their choice was sacred and inviolable. The principle was this simple, but to carry it out was extremely difficult. Su Li sat on his horse, looking at Chen Chongqing in front of him and Wang Pa in the distant rainy street. He did not say anything, the carefree mood on his face having disappeared long ago. Before Wang Pa and Chen Chongqing fell, Su Li would not die. This was the conclusion that the people of Xuanyang City had come to. Wang Po's death would assuredly shake the south and have an enormous effect, but if it was to kill Su Li, this price seemed acceptable. But the problem was that no one wanted Chen Chongqing to die. Chen Chongqing was the principal of the Orthodox Academy, the successor to the orthodoxy. The Pope wanted Su Li to die, but he definitely did not want Chen Chongqing to die. However, the Pope in the distant Li Palace would probably never have imagined that Chen Chongqing would actually offer up his life for the Li Palace's strongest opponent. From Xue He to Liang Hongzhuang, from Shaozhong to Liang Wang's son, from the military stronghold to Xuanyang City, Chen Chongqing had fought all the way. Although he had seen life and death several times, he had never faced the absolute threat of death precisely because of this factor. But now it was different. Lu Qing was an assassin. Although he also did not want Chen Chongqing to die at his hands, he had been paid. Killing Su Li was his mission. Just like all the people who valued money, like Zheshio, these people all placed great importance on completing their missions. This point was even higher than their own lives, and naturally it was also higher than the lives of others. In the first 7 strikes, Lu Qing had tried not to kill Chen Chongqing, but he realized that if he did not kill Chen Chongqing, he truly had no way of killing Su Li, so he would just kill. Lu Qing expressionlessly stared at Chen Chongqing and once again thrust his sword out. But this time, his sword was not thrust at Su Li, but directly at Chen Chongqing. An upper-level star condensation assassin was very rare, and a sure kill strike of this sort of assassin was terrifying. Before Chen Chongqing could even endure it, he felt a smear of night assaulting his face, as if it wanted to obliterate all light. Qin Changxing knew that he was about to die. He had lived day and night with the shadow of death for several years, so he was most sensitive to death. But at this moment, he did not care much, or perhaps it was better to say that he did not have the time to care. No one could change this matter. The still heavily injured Su Li could not, nor could the already bloodied Wang Pe, bitterly enduring in the torrential rain. Hua Jiefu and the priests naturally wanted to stop Lu Qing's strike, but they only had time to cry out in alarm. Right now, there was only one person in Xuanyang City that could stop Qin Changxing's death, Zhu Luo. He was a legend that had stepped into the divine domain. Although his sword glow had been blocked by Wang Po on the other side of the street, as long as he was willing to pay a sufficient price, he could still think of a way to get to the other end of the street. Suddenly, a crack appeared in the rain clouds in the sky, and a bright light suddenly appeared. A demon moon seemed to appear in the rain on the street. It seemed illusory, but it also seemed real. The metal blade was incomparably stable in the rain. Zhu Luo was still on the other side, but a middle-aged man with long hair draped over his shoulders suddenly appeared in front of Su Li. It was a mystical existence that was almost like a clone. Moon in the water was a kind of movement technique. It could even be considered a kind of divine technique. At the most crucial moment, one of the strongest experts of the continent had finally used his most powerful technique. He grabbed Qin Changxing and threw him to the side of the street, leaving Su Li to Lu Qing. It had been such a simple appearance, such a simple toss, such a simple pass. Zhu Luo had solved all the problems. He would let Qin Changxing live. He would let Su Li die. Moreover, the one who had killed Su Li was an assassin. It had nothing to do with him. Even if he was Zhu Luo, having his hands stained with the blood of the junior martial uncle of Mount Li was still troublesome. As expected of the storms of the 8 directions, the storm enveloped Xuanyang. As it turned out, from start to finish, the entire situation had been under his control. Qin Changxing simply had no ability to avoid Zhu Luo's hand. He watched as Lu Qing's sword swept past his body, stabbing at Su Li. He knew that there was nothing he could do. He was somewhat despairing, and then exhausted. But just at this moment, he suddenly realized that someone was laughing. No, to be more precise, 2 people were laughing. The first to laugh was Lu Qing, his laughter somewhat strange. The next to laugh was Su Li. His laughter was somewhat sorrowful, his emotions complex. Why were the 2 laughing? Just who was in control of the situation? When Lu Qing's sword did not stab into Su Li's body, but into Zhu Luo's phantom, everything was finally answered. It is inconvenient to continue using the name of the previous chapter, so it was changed to this. Chapter 419. When Zhu Luo was like the moon in the water, transforming into a seemingly solid clone that easily passed through the crack in space created by Wang Po's blade and arrived at the other end of the street. If he had directly attacked Su Li, perhaps Su Li would have died in the next moment, or perhaps he would have ignored Qin Changxing, who was about to be stabbed to death. Nothing else would have happened. But Zhu Luo did not do that. This was not a mistake. At least in that instant, those people who had not predicted the following changes all believed that Zhu Luo was not wrong, even feeling that his response was flawless. They sighed with emotion that the strongest expert of the human world had always been in control of the situation, and so they all thought of that beautiful phrase, "The storm envelopes Xuanyang." Even Zhu Luo himself believed that his response was perfect. Su Li would die, but he would not personally kill him. The Zhu clan of Tianliang County would be able to avoid many troubles in the future, and he would not leave a dishonorable mark in the annals of history. Even if he did leave a mark, it would be a little fainter. At the same time, he did not forget the request of the Li Palace, allowing Qin Changxing to live. The storm invaded the city. The moon hid behind it. The moon and the water split into 2, the illusory and real corresponding. His main body and his clone had almost the same battle prowess, and he was multitasking. Like a god, he used the simplest method to solve the most complicated problem. The scene at the time was truly very beautiful, and the conclusion of this matter should have been perfect. There was no reason for this legendary human expert not to be confident, but he had forgotten one very important thing. Confidence often meant underestimating the enemy. Moreover, it was not until the final moment that he realized who his true enemy was. The cold sword stabbed into Zhu Luo's illusory body. Chen Changsheng had previously felt that this sword was not as frightening as he imagined it to be, but only now did he realize that his opponent had always been holding back. This sword was truly very frightening, so frightening that even a person like Zhu Luo could not avoid it. There was a light squelch. Lu Qing's sword drew a strange curve in the torrential rain, like a branch in a moon pond, cutting the moonlight in the water into several pieces. At the same time, it also cut through Zhu Luo's illusory body, stabbing deeply inside. This was not the end, but the beginning. Only after Lu Qing's sword stabbed into Zhu Luo's illusory body did it truly begin to explode with its most powerful might. The cold sword suddenly became incomparably hot, and then it began to glow, began to burn, spitting out countless golden birds of fire. Each bird of fire seemed to be carrying a sun on its back. The rainy street was suddenly illuminated, and Zhu Luo's illusory body began to burn from the inside out. This was a secret technique of Mount Li, Golden Crow, sword technique. An angry howl resounded from the other end of the rainy street. Zhu Luo's gaze passed over Wang Po's blade and looked at the scene several dozen zhang away, his anger reaching its peak. Lu Qing's sword had clearly pierced his illusory body, but for some reason, his chest began to bleed. In the several centuries since he had stepped into the divine domain, had anyone dared to injure him? Had he ever bled before? He had long forgotten the feeling of being injured, and he had even forgotten that he could be injured, until this moment. However, what truly enraged him was not the matter of his injury, but the identity of the assassin and the fact that the assassin had used the Golden Crow sword style of Mount Li. This made him incomparably furious, and he even had a faint feeling that something bad was about to happen. The angry roar resounded through the rainy street. Zhu Luo's sword slashed towards Wang Po in front of him. His sword intent surged, the dark clouds parting and the moonlight growing countless times brighter. At the same time, the number of sword lights that landed on Wang Po's body increased by countless times. Wang Po's blood gushed out of his body like a torrential rain, but the iron blade remained motionless in the rain. Zhu Luo's sword slashed in front of him, but it landed even further away. At the same time that he attacked, he used the moon and water movement technique to appear on the other end of the rainy street and simultaneously attack Lu Qing. Although it was an illusory body, it possessed a strength almost identical to his own. Even if his opponent was the world's third-ranked assassin, how could he possibly block the might of this strike? Lu Qing's strange and elusive figure was completely enveloped in the sword light. Chi-chi, chi-chi. Countless sharp sounds rang out, and in just an instant, dozens of bloody holes appeared on his body. Any other opponent, even an upper-level star condensation expert like Lu Qing, would have died on the spot under Zhu Luo's sword brimming with rage. There would have been no accidents. But Lu Qing was no ordinary cultivator. He was an assassin. He was most skilled at killing people, so he was naturally most skilled at not being killed. The clothes he wore seemed very ordinary, even somewhat shabby, but they were actually woven from ghost silkworm silk and could block the cuts of ordinary blades and swords. Of course, in a battle of this level, this did not have much meaning. More importantly, underneath his clothes was a soft armor manufactured by the Wenshui Tangs. His ordinary and unremarkable face was actually a mask. Unlike the white paper on Xiao Zhang's face, his mask came from the pavilion of heavenly secrets and had the same defensive power as armor. Of course, this actually did not have much meaning, but when all of these things were added together, they had meaning. The meaning was that Zhu Luo's furious strike could not kill him on the spot, but that he could still stand in the torrential rain and continue to strike. The whizzing sounds became the crisp cry of sword intent colliding with a hard object. Lu Qing's entire body was covered in blood, but he still stood majestically. At this moment, the assassin had become a death soldier, because behind him was Su Li. The sword in his hand which was like the sparse branches of a moon pond, had clearly already exhausted its energy, but it still forcefully advanced a little more. The burning sword, spitting out countless birds of fire, exuding boundless light and heat, exploded in the next moment. The sword exploded in Zhu Luo's phantasm. A loud bang resounded. The torrential rain on the long street was jolted away. Zhu Luo's phantasm suddenly became incomparably bright, the edges faintly showing signs of damage. And on the other end of the street, Zhu Luo's chest was a bloody mess. He had silently followed Su Li and Chen Changsheng for several dozen days. Just a moment ago, he had suddenly launched an attack and covered Chen Changsheng in blood. Only when Zhu Luo arrived did he finally reveal his true goal. As it turned out, it was not to kill, but to protect. This strike, whether in terms of calculation or in any other aspect, had reached the pinnacle. It could be said that this strike was the best conclusion to Lu Qing's life as an assassin. A very strange strike, a very bright strike, a very patient strike, a very terrifying strike. This strike was powerful and terrifying to an unimaginable degree. But it was still not enough to kill Zhu Luo, because this pinnacle still belonged to the pinnacle of the human world. And for an expert like Zhu Luo, after stepping into the divine domain, one could say that they were no longer human. Before the angry howl had ceased, it suddenly became a clear howl, desolate and cold to the extreme, like the bright moon over the snowy plains. Zhu Luo's phantasm swayed under the assault of the torrential rain, but it did not disperse. In the next moment, a phantasm sword suddenly appeared in the phantasm's hand. A sword stabbed at Su Li. Su Li expressionlessly gazed at this sword, his right hand already gripping the handle of the yellow paper umbrella at some point. Even if they were powerless to fight, people like them would still die in battle. This was the general meaning. After Lu Qing attacked, he could no longer hold on and sat down in the rain. Blood spurted from his body and face. He was already incapable of doing anything else. Zhu Luo's sword had come, pure and cold, because he was truly enraged. He was determined to kill Su Li. No matter who tried to stop him, they would all die together. Suddenly, the faint cry of a dragon could be heard on the rainy street. Or perhaps it was the cry of a dragon. As it turned out, Chen Changsheng had still been present the entire time. Just when Zhu Luo was prepared to throw him to the corner of the street, Lu Qing's sword had arrived. So he had fallen on the rainy street. The dragon cry sword was in his hand. He stood on the water and swung his sword through the air. When he swung his sword, it was the cry of a dragon. His sword had met Zhu Luo's sword. The real dragon cry sword had met the illusory moonlight sword. Perhaps there was no difference between swords, and the dragon cry sword might even be stronger. But the disparity between sword users was truly too great. Noiselessly, the illusory sword was like moonlight illuminating the snowy plains. It easily passed over the edge of the dragon cry sword and continued forward. But then it was blocked by the sheath. Chapter 420. Chen Changsheng's face was illuminated by the sword glow, just like a snowy plain. Zhu Luo's phantom was right in front of him, right in the torrential rain, exuding boundless light, just like a statue of a god. An unimaginable pressure followed the sword and fell upon Chen Changsheng's body and soul. Of course, his sword was inferior to Lu Qing's sword, but it was also unusual. Facing a supreme human powerhouse that he had never met before, or even imagined, he would naturally use his strongest sword. The 3 swords that Su Li had taught him were all within it. The stupid sword helped him stand firm in front of this divine pressure. The intellectual sword helped him determine the trajectory of this sword in the torrential rain. It must be known that this sword belonged to the divine domain and was formless and traceless. At Wang Pe and Lu Qing's level, they might just barely be able to understand it, but if he had not learned the intellectual sword, it would have been impossible. Finally, he ignited his true essence and life in an attempt to block this sword. Alas, he could not block Zhu Luo's sword, just like how the arms of a praying mantis could not block a galloping carriage. As expected, the illusory sword, carrying the moonlight, passed over the edge of the dragon cry sword. Yet just as Zhu Luo's sword was about to stab into his eyes, it was blocked outside the sheath of the Dragoncry sword. How could an illusory sword be blocked by a real sheath? Only Chun Changsheng, who was present at the scene, understood what was going on. It was very hard to explain with words. For the spectators in the heavy rain, the scene they saw was the illusory sword had stabbed into the sheath that Chun Changsheng was holding with both hands. There were two moons in the night sky and in the water. There were two Zhu Luos on the rainy street. One was real, one was illusory, but the two moons were equally bright, and the two Zhu Luos were equally powerful. The only difference was whether or not they had emotions. When the illusory sword brimming with moonlight stabbed into Chun Changsheng's sheath, the illusory image of Zhu Luo in front of Chun Changsheng showed no change. Its face remained expressionless, radiating light and heat from within. Meanwhile, on the distant rainy street, Zhu Luo, who had already suppressed Wang Po's blade into silence, had his clear and cold expression instantly replaced by shock and perplexity. Countless swords suddenly cried out in the rain, and then the sounds of the torrential rain could no longer be heard. The harsh, coarse, sharp, clear, and oppressive cries of swords exploded through the rainy street. All of Xuanyang City could hear the cry of a sword. The illusory sword seemed to have encountered countless swords in an instant. Some collided, some scraped, and some cut each other. Countless sword cries rang out at the same time. In the heavy rain, some of the spectators with lower cultivation levels were knocked unconscious. However, nothing happened on the rainy street. Other than the rain, everything was quiet. Where did these sword chimes come from? Where did Zhu Luo's sword meet the sword? Those swords were all in the scabbard of the Dragoncry sword. Chun Changsheng's sword was originally 10,000 swords. Those 10,000 swords from the Garden of Zhou. However, Zhu Luo's sword was completely sealed in the scabbard. But in the end, they still met. The 10,000 swords were not unsheathed, but they could still face the enemy. Inside the scabbard, for a moment, there was a great army, a violent storm, and thunder. The illusory sword in Zhu Luo's hand continued to enter Chun Changsheng's scabbard. It wasn't returning to its sheath, but it was getting shorter. Some glowing particles fluttered around the opening of the scabbard. It was the scraps of the sword that had been worn away. Although the 10,000 swords were damaged, their sword intents were still sharp. In an instant, there were at least several thousand cuts and scrapes. How could Zhu Luo's illusory sword endure? Even on the other end of the rainy street, the real moon sword in his hand was also getting shorter. Even more unimaginable was that between the fingers that gripped the sword hilt, blood actually began to seep out. Zhu Luo's complexion became somewhat pale. In those eyes that had always been indifferent and emotionless like a god, a slightly perplexed expression appeared once more, and then it rapidly transformed into a flood of rage. He could feel the swords in Chun Changsheng's scabbard, and even recognized them as famed swords that had once passed away. Some of them even had cheese that he had been close to several hundred years ago. However, he had no way to lament Chun Changsheng's fortuitous encounter or inquire about the truth of the matter, because those incomparably powerful swords were currently attacking him, and he had truly been injured. He had actually been injured by an ethereal opening youth. I don't care what sort of young genius you are. I don't care if you're the youngest upper-level ethereal opening cultivator in history. In the end, you're still only at ethereal opening, only a 16-year-old youth. How can you injure me? How dare you injure me? I, the majestic storms of the 8 directions, was actually injured by you. This is something that cannot be allowed. An angry roar resounded through Xuanyang City, instantly suppressing the cries of those swords. The rain clouds gradually dispersed, and the moonlight became even brighter. Zhu Luo took a step towards Wang Po, the sword in his hand slashing down. On the rainy street, several dozen zhang away, his illusory figure leaned over to press down on Chun Changsheng. The illusory sword incessantly pierced into the scabbard. Those glowing sword shards sprayed out even more intensely. Those rays of light, those sword shards, were all the sharpness born from the cutting of sword intense with sword intense. It seemed very beautiful, but it was actually very dangerous. The torrential rain gradually slowed, but the puddles on the street had not yet dispersed. Those sword shards actually cut apart the ripples in the water. Needless to say, the gray stones and broken walls on the ground were covered in fragments. Lu Qing stood up from the rain and continued to stand guard in front of Su Li's horse, his sword held horizontally in front of him. Those glowing sword shards shot out like countless powerful arrows. In an instant, his hairband was severed. His black hair floated up, and then his hair was also severed. His clothes were in tatters, and his body was riddled with several hundred tiny bloody holes. He looked very miserable, but in the end, he had protected the horse and its rider. Su Li sat on the yellow buckskin horse, his head lowered, saying nothing. Logically speaking, Chen Changsheng should have already died. Both Su Li and Zhu Luo believed this. But miraculously, even though he was enveloped by the sword shards that filled the sky, not a single wound had appeared on his body. A qi that came from somewhere enveloped his entire body. This qi came from the jade rui at his waist, or the string of stone pearls that had appeared on his wrist at some point. No one could sense this qi. Only those sword shards could sense it. So when they arrived in front of Chen Changsheng, they naturally drifted away, the details perfectly concealed in the light. Then the rain fell once more, the rain clouds gathered once more, and the moonlight gradually faded. In the curtain of rain, Zhu Luo's illusory figure gradually dimmed, gradually becoming weaker. Finally, at a certain moment, the illusory sword was completely swallowed by the scabbard. The illusory figure abruptly collapsed, transforming into countless tiny bubbles. Countless cries of alarm rose up from Xuanyang City. Zhu Luo stood at the other end of the rainy street, his body covered in blood, his face pale. His right arm trembled. His sword was already damaged, leaving only the hilt. Just at this moment, Wang Po's blade finally arrived in front of him. Chapter 421. Since the start of the battle, this was the first time that Wang Po's blade had a chance to appear in front of Zhu Luo. Just when Zhu Luo was suddenly ambushed, his body was wounded, his phantasm shattered, and the moon in the water was forced to return to his body. The blade rose in the storm, reaching its peak and also reaching its peak. Wang Po paid no attention to what had just happened. He paid no attention to the bright moon amidst the rain, the assassin's sneak attack after sneak attack, Chen Changsheng's 10,000 swords clattering together as he slashed at Zhu Luo. It was like he was chopping firewood or even calculating accounts. He was incomparably focused. This might be his best chance to defeat Zhu Luo, and it might even be his only chance to do so before stepping into the divine domain. Zhu Luo raised his palm to the sky, dark clouds obscuring the moon. No one knew whether Wang Po's full-strength blade or Zhu Luo's hastily executed palm in his heavily injured state would be stronger. Even in the next moment, no one knew, because Wang Po's blade did not descend. The blade stopped in the air in front of Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo's palm also stopped in the air. The two did not meet. The torrential rain gradually subsided, but the street was still gloomy and quiet. The scene seemed to stop. Not even the sound of breathing could be heard. Zhu Luo silently gazed at Wang Po, his face abruptly turning abnormally pale. Countless strands of powerful qi gushed out from the edges of his palm and his clothes, scattering into the drizzle. This was the true essence he had forcefully restrained after his heavy injuries. It should have fallen on Wang Po's blade, but he had not expected that Wang Po would give up on this final chance. The blade stopped in the air. With a muffled hum, Zhu Luo's true essence completely missed, his qi completely dispersed into the world. He had not expected Wang Po to withdraw his blade, because he was not Wang Po's type of person. Wang Po had withdrawn his blade, not because he had calculated how the situation would develop, not because his battle instincts were so powerful that they could see through the dark clouds obscuring the moon. It was because of a very simple reason. Zhu Luo was injured, so he did not want to take advantage of him. He did not care about the best opportunity. He believed that as long as he could survive, There would be a day when he would step into the divine domain and then openly defeat Zhu Luo and the other experts of the divine domain. Thus, Wang Po withdrew his blade. Thus, Zhu Luo suffered heavy injuries, even more serious than the injuries that Lu Qing and Qin Changsheng had inflicted on him. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth and flowed out from his body faster and faster. Many of the things that happened in this world were illogical, but when he thought about it carefully, it made sense. The drizzle was light, and the long street was still quiet. Whether it was the people in the arena or the spectators in the distance, none of them spoke. Looking at Zhu Luo, who was covered in blood, it was hard for anyone to speak. It had already been several hundred years. Who had ever seen a mighty figure like the storms of the eight directions lose to someone else? Who had ever seen a peerless expert like Zhu Luo in such a sorry state, suffering such heavy injuries? Zhu Luo lowered his head, his long, wet hair draped over his shoulders. He looked at the sword in his hand. Only the hilt was left. The moonlight sword was made of steel and mithril. It was incomparably hard, but now it had become dust in the cracks of the wall and the ground. He raised his head and looked at Chun Chang Sheng, who was on the other side of the drizzle, and said, "Innate sword heart?" Upon hearing this, the spectators who were previously shocked by the sound of tens of thousands of swords were even more shocked. Zhu Luo then turned to Wang Po and said, "Admiration." In the entire continent, there were no more than 5 people who could make him say the word of admiration. But he had said it to Wang Po, because Wang Po had displayed a formidable will and a battle strength that far exceeded his age, and because Wang Po's blade, which had not yet descended, was far more powerful than the blade that had descended. Finally, Zhu Luo turned to the other end of the street, to the assassin covered in blood, standing in front of his horse. Today, in Xuanyang City, the 3 people guarding Su Li were all heroes. In terms of the damage they had dealt to Zhu Luo, Chun Chang Sheng took about 20%, Wang Po's blade that did not fall accounted for 50%, and the assassin called Lu Qing accounted for 30%. In this entire battle, Wang Po was the foundation, Chun Changsheng was the unexpected hand at the end, and Lu Qing was the most crucial game breaker. Assassins killed, so they naturally did not build. In the annals of history, they had always played the role of game breaker. The spectators in the distance followed Zhu Luo's gaze to look at the assassin. When they thought about how the 2 sudden changes in the battle had been caused by this person, they were all very shocked. They thought to themselves, just what is going on? Who is this assassin? Who could cultivate to the upper level of star condensation and still be willing to walk in the dark and play the role of an assassin? In which assassin could actually calculate all the details of the battle and successfully destroy Zhu Luo's control over Xuanyang City. Zhu Luo was too confident, or perhaps because Wang Po was too strong and could not hold back, but he did not mind casually killing Wang Po in Xuanyang City. This could even avoid a few future problems, but he would not let Qin Changsheng die. This assassin had calculated this point, so he had launched a sneak attack in the rain, his sword dripping with blood, causing Chun Changsheng to be surrounded by perils. The Zhu clan was one of the great clans of Tianliang County, with many clansmen. Even if Zhu Luo was not worried about the vengeance of the Mount Li sword sect or the enmity of the Southerners, he still had to consider the descendants of his clan. Moreover, he still had to consider his reputation, so he did not want to personally kill Su Li. As a result, he had chosen to use the moon in the water to go to the other end of the rain and capture Qin Changsheng. Zhu Luo believed that he had used the simplest method to create the most perfect situation, leaving behind a chance for the assassin to kill Su Li. However, he had not imagined that this chance had originally been created for him by this assassin. This was not an opportunity for the assassin to kill Su Li, but an opportunity to kill him. The hearts of people, love and hate, advantages and disadvantages, noble clans, reputation, sacredness. Everything was within the calculations of the assassin. Qin Changsheng stood in front of the assassin and very naturally recalled the words that Su Li had taught him on the road. If the world really did have an intellectual sword, then this was the true intellectual sword, right? Zhu Luo's cold voice rang out in the chilly rain. Lu Qing, you actually dare to attack this old man? The crowd let out an irrepressible cry of alarm. Some of the people that had been prepared to take advantage of the rain to continue their assault on Su Li subconsciously stopped. There were not many people that knew the name Lu Qing, but those that did all understood what this extremely ordinary name represented. Lu Qing was the terrifying assassin ranked third on the ranking of assassins of the world. After that unfathomable and incomparably sinister and terrifying chief assassin of the world disappeared, he could be said to be the most terrifying person on the continent. It turned out that this assassin was the legendary Lu Qing. No wonder he even dared to assassinate Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo looked at Lu Qing and said, "Do you really think that there's no one in the world that can dig out your background? You actually dared to reveal your background. So don't blame this old man for sending people to Mount Li to dig 3 feet into the ground." Lu Qing's mask was already in tatters. Bits of skin and clotted blood drooped everywhere, making him seem abnormally terrifying. He looked at Zhu Luo and said, "I'm not a person of Mount Li. So how did you find me on Mount Li?"